Today we tell the story of the triumph and tragedy of one of my great friends, Alan Wills, founder of Deltasonic Records. Alan built Deltasonic from nothing to be one of the most successful labels in the 2000s, with hits from the Coral, the Zutons and more. His journey was tragically cut short in 2014, but his memory lives on. Joining me to tell this story is Heston, Alan's partner, manager of Deltasonic, and now custodian of the back catalogue. This is Eyes Wide Open with me, your host, Lawrence Eastman. Heston, wow, welcome to Eyes Wide Open.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was scrolling on my phone on my YouTube suggestions and up popped Dreaming of You. And I haven't seen or heard that for years, the video at least. And it said it was 20 years since the Coral made that track, made that album, and I made the video. Bonkers, yeah. And it just brought back an amazing load of memories from that period of Deltasonic and of working with Alan and working with you. And I just thought it would be a great thing to hear the Deltasonic story, hear it from you, and just enjoy a couple of hours or more with you reminiscing about the past. Thanks for coming on the show.
You're welcome. It's a lovely idea.
Alan Wills, fortunately taken away from us too soon, 2014. Great friend of mine and, you know, your life partner. I just thought it'd be great for us to put his story down about the amazing time of Deltasonic, the tragedy that happened too. We can shed a little bit of light on that for people that may not have known about it. And he was just an incredible figure and one of my dearest friends. I've got so many great memories about him. So tell us about Alan Wills and how you two came together.
Well, I think it was really, I kind of knew of him before I met him. I kind of knew, not of him, but I kind of seen him around town and stuff like that. So I knew he was in the music business and stuff like that, but I didn't know him. And I used to live in Prescott, and it was kind of, that seemed like a million miles away from any music scene. I didn't really know anybody in the music business or anything. But for some reason I knew Peasy. I can't remember why. I think there was a mutual friend we had. Peasy is like a real old friend of Alan's and was also in the music business. But I didn't know him in that context. And I think I bumped into them in Prescott one day, and so we just got talking. I think Alan always said it kind of impressed him when I crossed my eyes or something when I was laughing. He thought that was quite funny. So so we were just we just met then, but didn't really sort of connect. And then I think, I mean, you know, in terms of like friendship or anything, we didn't sort of take it.
But he was in bands, wasn't he, Alan?
He was in bands, but I didn't know of any of that at the time. I didn't know anything about him. But when I actually met him properly was on the train coming back from town to Prescott. We both got off at Prescott, and I was like, what are you doing here? Because like Prescott's mine, you know. And so we got talking then, and then he was kind of telling me what he was doing, which was managing bands and stuff. So
tell us a little bit about Alan. Give us a little potted history of Alan Wills, because he was such a unique figure. He was such an eccentric guy, a maverick, a rebel. Yeah.
There was a hell of a lot that came before I met him, but, you know, obviously I found out about all of that along the way. But he was brought up in Anglesey, born in Bristol. He was adopted, and then his mother was from Anglesey, and they moved up to Anglesey. So he was brought up there. And
so he had a Bristol Welsh twang, didn't he?
He had like a southern accent, really, but with a little bit of, I don't know what was in there. It was a bit of a mixture, wasn't it? Yeah. I was always quite surprised when he spoke, because I'd seen him around town and just thought he had quite a sort of severe look. And then when I first spoke to him and he had this kind of soft southern accent, I was always quite surprised. But yeah, he was in bands when he came. I think he was 18 when he started to play the drums, and he knew somebody who lived in Chester who was from Anglesey. I think it was something to do with the band James. I don't know whether there was a connection there. And this guy said, why don't you have a go on the drums? And he did, and it was just like he had a natural flair for it, so he kind of got into that. And then
he was in Shack, wasn't he?
Yeah, he moved over to Liverpool at that point when he was 18. It was kind of like step by step from Anglesey to Chester, and then somebody he knew there said, you know, do you want to be in a band? And so I don't know what the first band was, but he ended up, he was in Shack for a while. He's also, I think he was in the Wild Swans as well for a bit with Paul Simpson.
And Top with Joe
and then, well, it got to that point when Alan was like, right, we've got to make it, you know, right, let's do a bit of pop.
Yeah.
So they set up Top with, so that was Joe and Paul Cabana.
And they were with Alan all the way through, weren't they?
Yeah,
as well?
yeah, they were friends from, I mean, I think Joe was probably 16 when he met Alan.
Yeah.
You know, Alan was about 5 years older than him, I think. But they were like, you know, so close forever after that. But so, yeah, they were in a band called Top. And Ant and Dec, in their former life, what was the band they were called?
PJ and Duncan.
PJ and Duncan were big fans of Top.
Wow.
And one of them was crying outside a Top gig because he couldn't get in, and Joe found out and came out and got him in. So
yeah, because I grew up, my dad had a rehearsal room in Liverpool called the Ministry.
Oh yeah,
they
I remember
opened
that.
in the 1980s. Yeah. And all of those amazing Liverpool bands that came through in the 80s, is kind of, I grew up around them. I was only 4 at the time, or 5. I grew up, you know, in the Ministry, and I remember Alan vaguely, but I remember Joe, because Joe was from Kirby, I'm from Kirby, so we knew each other, but I hadn't seen them in a long time until, you know, we came back round again with Deltasonic, but we're not there yet. So it happened with Top. You know,
so it happened with Top, but I don't know how far it got with Top. They did a few. I think they got a deal. I think they did get a deal, probably because Alan was like, I think they had a manager as well. Maybe, I think it might have been Mark Lewis who went on to do big things as well. But yeah, I don't think it made it. And at that point, Alan was like, right, I've had enough of this. I've had enough of being stoned and sitting in the cafe to back, you know, pretending to be French philosophers. I'm going to, you know, I don't want to waste my life.
He just didn't smoke pot.
So he decided to get into management, and I don't know how he found the first bands, and who they even were, but I know when I met him, he was managing a band called Gluebound.
Gluebound, I kind of remember those. Yeah. Was it Nick Burgess?
So Nick Burgess,
the singer.
I'm not sure what his role was. He'll kill me for saying that, but Nick has gone on to massive things. Gluebound did all right. And, you know, they had a deal and stuff, but that eventually.
What's he do now? Isn't he like top of one of the labels?
Yeah, he's co-president of, I believe it's Parlophone.
Wow.
I need to check that. I know it begins with P, but it's one of the massive ones, and he's co-president. He's done all right. Yeah, and he's a really nice guy, Nick. Yeah. So it was Gluebound, and he was also managing Joe. Joe Fearon, who was in Top with him, and you know, they were mates, as I say, for years. But Joe, in his own right, was a musician, and
brilliant musician,
fantastic, and was like a professor. You know, there's nothing that Joe doesn't know about any genre. I don't think.
Encyclopedic knowledge of music, isn't it?
Absolutely. And he was doing his own stuff just in his room on a computer and stuff like that. And he was very much into kind of. I don't even know how to describe what Joe was into, but it was kind of like electronic and
avant-garde hip-hop,
European disco and all kinds of mad stuff like that. But he was, you know, he is so talented. So Alan really, really championed Joe, and was like, he wanted so much for Joe to be successful with his music because he recognised his talent. So he'd be down there at the rehearsal room all the time, like, come on, Joe, get it finished, you know, to try and get it out. But Joe was just kind of more into making it, rather than, making the music, rather than getting it finished. I think he enjoyed the process, So that happened. But
was that called EVA?
EVA was the precursor to Deltasonic, and EVA was like the sort of label that facilitated Joe's records going. It wasn't just Joe. There was Tony, CG, and John McAvoy. And somebody else, I think the Sand People, which then became the Mountaineers, I think. So there was a series of clear vinyl records made from, you know, what Joe was doing and also the others around him. And they were put out on a little label called EVA, which they set up. Yeah, but that was pre-Deltasonic.
And did that lead into Deltasonic? Because Deltasonic was a departure, wasn't it, really, from EVA, which was more hip-hop based.
It was more hip-hop, yeah.
And then he wanted to go back to guitar music.
He wanted to, yeah.
And he believed that there was a new cycle of guitar music brewing, or that guitar music comes in cycles.
He recognised cycles in music, and he thought there's something...
And we're at the end of a guitar cycle currently.
Yeah, because there's been Oasis, hadn't there? And
the Britpop
thing. But then there was this new thing, like the Strokes were coming through and stuff like that. And Alan was like, we didn't say they were shit, because he did recognise they were all right. But actually, it was, to be honest, we're jumping ahead a little bit, because I think the Strokes was around the same time as the Coral. But Alan recognised there was probably going to be another cycle due. at any point, you know, soon. He was on the lookout. And then he was always down the rehearsal room anyway because of Joe and his other friends, like Peasy was managing bands, I think. And he'd gone down to see Peasy on this particular day, which you probably, I don't know, you're going to ask me about how he found the coral, which I was just about to go into.
Well, that's just naturally go into, because you know what we're laying the ground here with is that how he came to find the coral, which is kind of the pivot point in the story of Deltasonic, isn't it? But I think it's interesting he was out there
already, always buzzing around. He was always in different rehearsal rooms, you know, in studios because he knew people, and you know, or he'd be borrowing an instrument for somebody or something like that. So he was always out and about and like listening and talking to people. So he had his ear to the ground all the time. Yeah.
So tell us about then the story of Alan finding the coral and what that was like in the early days, because I come into the story a little bit after that. Yeah.
So he was still working with Joe, and, you know, trying to get this thing finished. But then I think it was Peasy who he'd gone to see at the rehearsal room. And I think Peasy had said, the kids in the, you know, or the room there that you might... I don't know whether he suggested he goes to see them or he told him about them. And then Alan said, who is it? Can I go in? And he opened the door and you saw this little gang of, like, urchins sitting there, but coming out with some really interesting music, and he was just impressed straight away. You could see there was a vibe, and found out a bit more about them, introduced himself, and then it just kind of went from there. He just kind of somehow, you know, just got involved with them and you know, started talking to them about music and the influences that he could recognise from what they were doing. He told them probably what they didn't even know about where things had come from, and you know, so they just ended up talking about art and music and literature, you know, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, so that's kind of, I think, where I entered the story a little bit. I remember, because I got introduced to Alan from Tony Asigi, who was in EVA working with Joe. And I hadn't seen Alan since I was a kid. He remembered me from the ministry, but I couldn't really remember him. But I did remember Joe. And it was like, I knew Joe from Kirby where I grew up. So that was all cool. And at the time, I was working on films. And I was like an assistant director, and I wanted to be... Is
that what you wanted to do?
I wanted to be a director, get into filmmaking, and I set up a company called Stampede Films.
I remember.
And I got a loan off the Prince's Trust, which I bought a load of equipment with, and then, you know, pretended to be a filmmaker at that point in time, and I was just trying to get a gig and stuff, and got introduced to Alan, and someone had said, there's this band called The Coral, amazing band coming through, everyone's talking about them. And I was meeting with Alan, and he said, okay, well, come and meet the band.
Had they already released the first single, but it was just being talked about?
It was just being talked about. And I remember being invited to, I think it was the Motor Museum recording studio on Lark Lane.
Yeah.
And went in with Joe. And I remember going in and hearing Shadows Fall playing through the speakers. And I was just like, wow.
What the hell's that?
What the hell's that? I hadn't heard anything like that. And
did you see, like, 5 boys in sleeping bags with pot noodles, because that's what was going on. They slept there all night.
That was what was so, you know, incongruous about it, was the fact that this deep, dark music, Shadows Fall, was just an incredible song. And these kids, they were kids, they were 17, 18, 19 max, still with the Berghouses on, you know, the night trainers and
the little bowl cuts.
Yeah, and I couldn't get my head around it at first. It was like, how is this band coming out? How is this music coming out of this gang of kids? And I knew in that moment, I thought, wow, I want to be a part of this. This is exciting. This is special. And I got a gig. Alan said, would you want to follow the band around? Because we went on tour and document it. So I went around with them with a few months, just not really knowing what I was doing, just pointing the camera at them and collecting footage. And that went on for, it must have been about 3 months. I even went to Paris with them. Do you remember that gig in Paris?
So was that when he kind of took them out of circulation? Because when he first got
20
involved...
20 years ago.
No, you can't remember.
21 years ago, but it was they played under a different name.
Yeah, he took them, when he first got involved with them, he took them out of circulation because he knew that what they were working on wasn't quite there yet, ready to launch it out there. So he kind of took them out because they used to have a residency in the Cavern Saturday afternoons, and so he wanted them to, you know, go and hone this other sort of, you know, strand of what they were doing. and kept them out the way, and then he put them out on tour under the Urban Parisians.
That's right, yeah, it was under a different name.
Yeah, so I don't know whether, was that around that time maybe?
That was that tour, yeah, me and Jay Melia, because Jay Melia then became, I brought Jay Melia, the bear, I brought Jay Melia in with me from the video angle, and he became their driver, didn't he? Yeah, he became their driver for quite a long time, yeah. And we ended up driving them around the country, doing the gig, doing the tour, and ended up in Paris, and I was just collecting footage, and Alan was going, well, what are we going to do with it? I said, I don't know yet, I'm still trying to figure it out. The deal was getting closer and closer, there was more and more interest happening. Take it over from there. So
that was then, at that point then, the buzz had obviously started, if the deal was kind of on the go. So he'd taken them out of circulation, back out there, Urban Parisians, and then he said, right, we're ready for the press to see them now. So he invited Imran from Enemy. I think it was very early days for Imran. He was just like, but anyway, so Imran came along to, review the gig. And a couple of people had said to him, are you sure, they're ready? And he was like, yep, absolutely. And when Alan went, yep, you just trusted that it was, he knew. And he was right, because they played the Sheffield Lead Mill, and that's where Imran was. And we were standing together in the audience, and I hadn't seen them since the Cabin days. And I was kind of a little bit, but I thought they were good, but I didn't see the side that Alan saw, because they didn't really play that spooky stuff at that point. Anyway, so we're at Sheffield Lead Mill, and they came on, and oh my God, it was just mind-blowing. It was ridiculous. There was another room in the Lead Mill, and everyone was coming through. It was just absolutely bonkers. And I just felt a little energy from Imran, and I looked at him, and he looked at me, and he went, I feel like I've just witnessed history.
But you were first in. You see, that was the excitement, as being first in.
Being first in and discovering something. And so, that probably did help to launch his
they were just an incredible band. At that point in time, the energy from them, and the tightness and the
youth. The
youth. They were just
from
so
them.
good.
Yeah,
they were just so good.
So surprising.
Yeah.
And so that's how it kind of, the buzz started. They got good reviews, and then Alan had set up a label as such, I think, using a contract that had initially been used for another company, like Twisted Nerve, I think it was. It was like a template sort of situation.
What's a sign? Because this is important. This
is before the Sony deal.
Because the deal is, for me, is just mega. With the deal he signed is just mega. So I think let's lay the foundations of that. So what was the Twisted Nerve deal?
Well, he had to secure
the band.
The band. He was kind of managing them, but he had to he had to get a record out, and he had to secure that. So he'd kind of asked, there was a guy called Simon Duffy who was a friend of his, who used to be, I think, an engineer or producer, and he knew that Simon had worked in different places, and he asked for advice. So Simon came in as a consultant and kind of said, well, you could base it on that type of deal, which is basically you sign them for a certain, a limited, maybe like a single or an EP or something, but with a view to then having the rights to the first album.
For the album,
the option, yeah. So I think that's what we did. I think that's what he did at the time, was set up this Deltasonic. So there was EVA for the initial hip-hop stuff, and then that same company then sort of morphed into Deltasonic, but using this kind of template sort of thing to sign. So we had to get Bill, who was only, I don't even know whether he was 17 when we signed. We had to get his mum to come and do the signatures and stuff like that. So so that was the initial deal with the band, direct with Deltasonic. But then, there was a buzz starting to happen around the band, and people were, labels were wanting to find out more about them and talk to them and stuff. So that's when it sort of started.
But it was a big buzz, wasn't it? It was like,
it grew really fast.
Yeah.
All the majors.
Everyone was interested.
Was really interested. There was a lot early on, probably before Alan got involved, that was saying, oh, it was a bit early, because that's what they did. They waited until there was like a frenzy, and then they'd jump in with the checkbooks. Yeah. Whereas Alan was the opposite of that. He could see it early on, and he could see the potential, which is what proper A&Rs should be, isn't it, really? And so he had that advantage over the people that would wait. So by this time, but they weren't bothered. It's not their money they're spending, is it? It's like somebody else's checkbook. Totally, so they'll just wait, and then it's a sure thing then. But then it's obviously a bidding war that happens in those situations. So it got to the point where all the majors were like going,
ballistic over it.
And they were, turning up at our house.
Because what I always thought was a real sign of Alan's character was how tight he was with the band, and how much respect they had for him and he had for them.
Yeah,
you know, and I think it was that bond they had.
They trusted him fully,
totally,
and it was
and
well
they were
founded.
right to, yeah, totally, they were right
because
to
he was
trust
a genuine,
100%
man with integrity,
especially in an industry that's full of sharks.
Was just the opposite of that. Yeah. I mean, you know, he could be ruthless in his, you know, negotiations or like putting bands together and stuff. You know, they're crap, get out of that band, put that band with that band. You know, because he could see the prize at the end of it, and he could see what worked and like where people were wasting their time. You know, he just had a natural instinct. But he also was a musician and an artist and passionate about all of that stuff. So he wanted to educate people.
Yeah, he did,
and so he was so enthusiastic that some people thought he was a bit insane because he was so enthusiastic.
He's one of the few people that I would call a mentor, you know, on a handful, like that, a handful of people I could say that about in my life, and he was one of them, you know, 100%.
Yeah, well, when he met the choral, I mean, you know, I was talking to James recently, and he said Alan gave them all a book.
Wow.
Like, I think he gave James The Old Man in the Sea or something, and he gave Bill Jonathan Livingston Seagull. I can't remember what he gave the others. But he gave them all a book that was he thought was pertinent to that. He'd got to know them, the characters. And James said when they're looking back now, it's really uncanny how those books were right for each individual. Yeah. So, but that's what, you know, so they would get on a level on that basis of sort of the art and the sort of, and, you know, and he'd get them into Cannes and, you know, all kinds of music that they may have not.
Wasn't just music though, it was films as well, because that's where one of the way I connected with Alan was that my love of cinema. I'd found someone who I could talk to about films and deep level of cinema.
I knew stuff.
I knew, you knew the themes and the shots and the directors, and Orson Welles was...
I don't know how he soaked all that information up.
I know, he was a bit autistic, wasn't he, I guess?
Well, I think so, yeah. So he knew all, you know, there's nothing you could ask him that he didn't seem to know, or he could blag at least.
He was cool. He was just a cool guy, he was a super cool guy.
But he inspired trust in all of the bands. Definitely. They knew that he was a solid person and he would fight for them. And, you know, even when it came to down the line, which is sort of fast forwarding a little bit, but like going down to, you know, once Major was involved, and then they'd want maybe, well, you know, do you want to dress like that? Maybe we could get, you know, Johnny Blue Eyes or whatever to come and, you know, style you or whatever.
End up like Harry Styles.
Yeah, no, they want to look like they do. That's that's who they are. That's part of the charm, you know. So no, just back off and leave them alone. Whereas some people would just cave into that, or some people would like that, but they didn't want it. They wanted to be themselves, and you know that's who they were. Yeah,
he protected his bands and their artistic integrity.
He really did. He fought
really
for
did.
That.
Yeah. I always noticed that. And
but he had, you know, like. You were asking about his character. You know, he was so he was brought up in Anglesey and probably a bit of an outsider in that way. So he's come to Liverpool as a bit of an outsider. So he probably recognised that in them as well, that because they were from the Wirral, so there was a little bit of outsiderness to them.
Yeah, it's good observation.
Yeah, and I think he had a little bit of he had a massive chip on his shoulder at first. Actually, remember when I first met him, and all he did was like complain and like moan about people, you know, in the business, like, oh, I don't know how come he's doing that and this, that and the other. I think he felt like he didn't understand why he hadn't got further quicker. Yeah. It was like it was waiting to happen, and he was like, why aren't I there now? And it was kind of frustrating for him because he knew he had the capacity, and I think it's because he didn't play the game, he didn't do networking stuff, he wasn't a social butterfly or anything like that. He didn't suck up to people.
Well, he didn't get wrecked, did he?
No, he didn't. He was very, very
because that was one of the things that impressed me about him at the beginning, or intrigued me, was that he was right in the centre of this rock and roll lifestyle, rock and roll culture, and he was teetotal.
Oh, totally.
Yeah. And that was so impressive to me at the time, because I wasn't teetotal back in those days. I was still young, and I was enjoying my youth, you know.
I remember once though when. Because some people used to come back to our house, you know, like if some of the A&R men had come up to see him or see one of the bands, and one of them, really nice guy, I can't remember, I wouldn't mention his name anyway because of what I'm going to say, but he had obviously partaken in some of the, you know, in coke basically that night. Yeah. Alan hadn't. And he came back to stay at ours and Alan out-talked him. Unbelievable. He was off his head. Like, and then he just like wound down and Alan was like,
oh yeah, there was no stopping him. Once he started, there was no stopping him. He could talk for England.
So he didn't need cocaine because he outdid everybody. But what they were on.
The reason he became teetotal was of a tragedy earlier in his life, wasn't it, with his brother?
Partly that, I think. It's partly that because his brother died. His brother killed himself. Yeah, when Alan was, I think...
Deeply affected Alan, didn't it?
It really did, and...
because they were both adopted.
Yeah. So they were brought up together, in Anglesey. And I think that really did affect him. And then it was very shortly after... You're talking
about it a lot. I've had a good few conversations with Alan over his brother.
Well, he had a good understanding by that point, I think, of loss and grief and death and stuff, like, because that happened. And then 6 weeks later, you probably put it down to heartbreak if you want to call it that, but his mum had a heart attack only a few weeks later. And then so he lost two most important people to him in a very short space of time, like almost at the same time. And I think that really did, it affected him, as a person, but also in his whole outlook on life. And I think when he got to the point where it made him value life and the shortness of all the possible limits on it. And so he wanted to cram it all in. So I think he got to like 30 and thought, well, if it's not happening now, let's crack on.
Yeah. Well, it always just super impressed me how he was able to maintain that self-discipline.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was just natural in him. It was natural. It's like, right, okay, not having that anymore, gone. Focus on music was his addiction, and finding good music and bands was his addiction.
I mean, he really loved it, didn't he?
Yeah,
and he was really that was his driver, was to find good music and hopefully make some money from it. But his motivation was the music, wasn't it? It was the art.
Towards the end, towards like when the contract
really
comes at the end, it was like, oh my God, come on, give us a Coldplay. He was getting to that point where money would be nice as well. Yeah. But it wasn't about that. It was about the journey. It was about finding like the diamonds in the rough and creating with them something that was, special. And that's what he was always looking for, that.
So tell us about the actual deal itself, because for me, I think Alan Wills' genius can be reduced down to that deal, because that deal was just so groundbreaking, and it launched 1,000 ships. There's so many people that were able to benefit from Alan, and still are, including me, and I kind of largely thank Alan for my career, my filmmaking career. But it was just such an amazing deal. The way he was able to negotiate it, the way he was able to execute it and pull it off, it was just legendary. And I think a lot of that was to do with his relationship with the Coral, in that they were backing him. Is that no major could get round him to backdoor them, because they were loyal to Alan. Alan was loyal to them, and I think
he had that belief.
That was the leverage. He was able, because you don't want to go into any negotiation unless you've got leverage, and he had tons of it. He had tons of it. And it was always, for me, just like, it was such a genius move, being able to reroute some of the capital that these global corporations have, like Sony, and he was able to route that cash and that energy into Liverpool, and create a multitude of opportunities for people from all walks of life. It wasn't just musicians. So for me, that I always look back on that as like, wow, I'm amazed that he did it. So tell us a little bit about the actual events around it.
He knew he had to get a good lawyer to deal with it. Well, I mean, prior to the deal even happening, there was all these, labels kind of trying to get in there, and they were turning up to our house. This is the power he had. He didn't have to go down and see them in London anymore, and I think he kind of revelled in it a little bit. He was like, why don't you come up to Prescott?
But he didn't even invite them to Liverpool, did he? He didn't say, let's go meet a bar or a cafe. Come to our house in Prescott. Come to our house in Prescott. And we had a semi-detached house, and he would take them in the back room, and like, you're interested in, I know you're interested in the Coral. We've also got, listen, wait till you hear this. And so, like, he played them. There was captive audience. And you knew that that's what they wanted, but you knew that there was also this other stuff that, in a way, was great for them, because it meant that they could, it was like
was a bargain, wasn't it, really? Because they were getting more than just one.
I was speaking to Jamie, your son, my friend, and I was asking him about, you know, some of the events with Alan. He said, I remember coming back home once to Prescott, and he said, and there was about 4 limousines outside the house.
Waiting in line.
Waiting in turn to come in and see if they could close the deal.
Yeah, it was hilarious.
Yeah.
One of them was on 9/11 on the day that it happened. I think it was it Go Discs or somebody? And we had a TV on the wall in the back room where he was entertaining all these executives. And it wasn't just like, this was the top executives coming up. It wasn't you just...
So he came to negotiate the deal in 9/11.
Came to negotiate the deal or to talk about what the possibilities would be. And somebody must have buzzed through and said, put the TV on, this is, you know, and so that came on and everyone was like, oh my God. So obviously the conversation stopped because it was all about that then. But that obviously, you know, that was a bit of a mad one. But in general, so we had all these limousines turning up to God knows what the neighbours thought we were up to.
So the Coral had created that much excitement that all of these major record labels were willing to travel to Prescott in limousines to try and close the deal. And Alan was playing that.
He was having a ball, playing the music that he'd been trying to get, you know, he'd been knocking on, you know, for, like when I met him, he'd been managing bands and like getting meetings with people, and now it was like, now it's my turn. So,
but the Coral wasn't the only band he had at that time. He had a bit of a stable growing, and it got bigger.
It was growing the stable, So there were, the Zutons had kind of formed at that point. I think the Coral introduced him to Dave McCabe, who was doing... He had been in another band, Tramp Attack, but he wasn't then. I think he was doing his own thing. And I don't know whether he'd called it the Zutons at that point. I can't quite remember. But anyway, they were involved. So they were part of the stable. I don't think Abby had joined at that point yet. And then there was the Sam Band. They were the Sam, because that's Dave. That's no. It was the Sam People, I think, but then they became the Mountaineers.
Okay. So you had them. Was that Danny? Was it from the Mountaineers?
No, Danny Connors. Danny Connors. So that was another one. So there was Danny Connors.
Yeah.
There was the Mountaineers, who were called Sand People. They were from Wales, and then there was the Zutons. I think that was it at that time. But so that was the collection that he was kind of playing people. And to be honest, it was all good stuff. So they, you know, they were quite impressed with what the whole, you know, label was being, you know, the label that was being offered to them. It soon became apparent that he wasn't just prepared to just do a deal with us, sign the Coral off. It was like, no, this is going to be a label deal, and I'm going to be in charge of the label, and I want autonomy. And amazing. You know, and then... So
were they all buying into that idea?
Yeah, because they were all like... That's what, you know, it's all about that, isn't it? It's all about the negotiation.
But what he was doing with that was creating a sanctuary, if you like, for bands who wanted to maintain their artistic integrity.
He could put his arms around and protect
and the major labels couldn't come in and overly influence the career of these young kids in the bands and take them off in directions they didn't want to go.
It was early days for them, and he could see where... you know, where they could get to. And so, it was exactly that. It was like starting a kind of a sanctuary almost. Yeah. So, but then he had a friend, Josephine, who was a lawyer in the music industry. And I think that's where the connection came. He knew he needed a good lawyer to kind of set up a good deal, you know, when it became apparent it was going to be a label deal. So I think she might have worked for Richard Bray. Either that or she introduced Alan to Richard. And Richard's a brilliant guy. And he came up with Alan with this deal over, you know, several years, and it was just a brilliant deal. So it was a joint venture.
Who got the gig and why did they get the gig?
So eventually Sony got the gig, and it was because really it was Rob Stringer. Yeah. So Rob Stringer was the head at Sony at the time.
Sony Music in UK, wasn't it?
In the UK, he's now obviously gone on to like world.
Well, Rob Stringer is now the CEO of Sony Entertainment. Yeah, he's like the head honcho at Sony.
Yeah, and what a nice guy, brilliant. But he kind of came along a little bit later on, to be honest. I think... were
they waiting in the wings, you think?
I think they were probably waiting in the wings. I think they'd sent an A&R man like early on, maybe even before Alan and that whoever that... I don't know who that was, and they'd said it was early days, we'll keep an eye. So he didn't get involved in the frenzy, I'd say, at the, like, you know, in the middle of it all. He kind of was one of the later ones to turn up.
But I always remember Alan had a good relationship with Rob Stringer. I think that was one of the reasons he got the gig, wasn't it? He respected him the most, I think.
He respected him, and he could tell that Rob respected him.
Yeah, okay.
as well, you know, because I think he felt underestimated initially, you know, for a few years. I think he felt like
imposter syndrome.
Yeah. Well, no, I don't think he had that. I think it was the opposite of that.
Right, okay.
Yeah, no, he thought he should have been there a long time before. No.
What the hell's going on?
Yeah, why aren't I there now?
Yeah. I think their relationship is kind of what made the early part of Deltasonic a success, was because Rob Stringer had Alan's back.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
He respected him. He understood that he was a bit of a maverick, but he had the right view, and he knew that the band really respected him, and so that was, you know, and also he did have a connection because he was friends from like university or whatever with their uncle, with James and Ian's uncle.
Wow, what a coincidence.
Uncle, I can't remember his name now, but anyway, he was friends with him from uni, so there was a connection. That's not anything to do with it really, but it just happened to make it a little bit easier, a little bit nicer, because they were then more likely to be a bit more sort of open to,
because he had a reputation, Rob Stringer, of being good with the artists, even though he was a high level executive.
Yeah, he was, and he was also good with us, with the label, because I remember, I don't know whether you came, maybe you did, we were all invited down
to Mercury.
No, it wasn't the Mercury, it was or maybe it was after. No, I don't think it was. We went to Sony's HQ. I don't know whether it was a launch party or something, but anyway, there was loads of discs, you know, like
gold discs,
and they had them made for all of us.
Yeah,
like,
I got one.
Yeah, did you get one?
Yeah.
So I got one. Nikki and Karen, who worked in the
only
office,
prize I've ever had in my life. Thanks, Rob.
But what a nice thing to do, and how like motivational. You know, it was really motivating for the team. He respected the team, and he made us feel like we were valued.
So the actual deal itself, because it was so groundbreaking in terms of everyone who benefited from it. What was the deal?
Well, it was a joint venture.
Yeah.
So it was a 50-50 joint venture with Sony, but Sony put all the money in, which was nice.
Yeah.
But then obviously Alan found all the bands and developed them. So there was two parts to it. So there was an overhead, and then there was another part, which was the development fund. But then there was also all the promotion and marketing spend. You know, which,
so you had Sony to do the marketing side of things.
They did that. We liaised with them because we had to keep an eye on it, obviously, to make sure that it was going the way we wanted it to go, because he had a clear vision of how we wanted the band to be, you know, put out there. So, but all of that, so, you know, and it was, I think, initially, was it a 7 or 8 year deal? Can't remember.
7, wasn't it? But you squeezed another year out of it
Alan
later.
Got another year out because they made a mistake. There was some kind of technical hitch or something.
So I come back into it a little bit then. So I'd been following the Coral round for months, right? And Alan was asking for the film. I was going, that's not, I don't know, it's not ready, it's not ready. And I went, I'll do it when I'm going on holiday. I said, I'll do it when I get back. And he said, okay, no problems. Yeah. He said, you know, we're close to a deal. Right. I said, okay, yeah, great. So I went to Thailand and I'm sitting thinking about the film. And I come home, I'd been traveling for at least 24 hours, right? I was absolutely
knackered,
wiped out from chaos in Thailand, and then a 24-hour journey. Walk through the door and my dad goes to me, Alan Wills has been trying to get hold of you constantly. He said, ring him straight away. So I was like, okay, rang him and said that. He said, no, we did the deal. Sony want your film. How quick can you deliver it? So,
oh my God.
Yeah, so I said, a week? He went, yeah, okay, a week. I'll see you tomorrow, okay? So I literally just got home and he told me he'd done the deal. He wanted the Coral documentary, and I was like, that was it. I was under pressure then. I had to deliver for the first time.
This is real now.
This is real. This is real. And I went to sleep, slept as long as I could, got up the next day, went to a local studio, Julie Lau. He gave me the studio, she helped me out, and I edited with a guy called Patrick Hall, and we spent a week editing this little documentary and delivered it to Alan. The band loved it. Alan loved it. Fortunately, Sony loved it.
Yeah. Was this for the EPK?
It was the EPK, yeah. So it was the band going on tour around the UK, ending in Paris. I mean, it was the absolute beginning of my filmmaking career. So it's quite crude, some of the techniques that I used back then. But I look back at it fondly, absolutely. And they said, okay. We went, do you want to do the first music video, which was Skeleton Key?
Bloody hell.
Yeah, and that kind of...
Oh, I remember that. Was that done over here in the Vryll?
Skeleton Key was filmed in Liso Lighthouse.
Thought it was, because there was all those like weird buildings.
Well, the Coral had established a really kind of cool, macabre, like Victorian visual style. Yeah. And, you know, it suited my tastes and my sensibilities. So I just developed that idea and ran with it. And so it was consistent with what they'd already done, you know.
Yeah, so it didn't change the tone particularly. It was kind of
so we went along with it, and we did the music video. Some of it was on tour as well, because we carried on a second tour, I think it was, and got some footage there. But yeah, it was a performance video at Liso Lighthouse. I think I wanted to go to like somewhere cool in Europe, but the Coral were like, no,
Liso,
the Vryll.
okay,
That became a theme then. So tell us about from there, from doing the deal and how everything changed.
So deal done. Rob Stringer in place and everything, you know, all the team and everybody's all, we bought the office because we had money then, so we bought the office, and then we got Nikki and Karen in. I just thought, well, I don't know who to employ for this type of thing, so we went to the Liverpool Uni and found the best students from that course, from the business music business course, and they were brilliant, and they stayed with us for forever, really.
I remember them.
So the team was there, that was all in place, and then, you know, Alan just cracked on with it.
Because that was the thing, wasn't it? It was one thing pulling that deal off, and that deal was an amazing deal. I don't know anyone that's done as good since, at least in the north or the northwest. But the next challenge came, which was delivering.
Back it up now. With all your big talk. Let's see what you can come up with. But he knew, obviously, what the Coral had. He knew that the Zutons had some really brilliant stuff as well. So he had no problem with that.
No.
It was just the details. So obviously producer and stuff like that. And they had, the Coral had, how did that now? The Coral had been on tour, and I think was it Rob Stringer? No, I know what it was. They'd done that recording in the Motor Museum, and Ian Brody heard that recording.
The Shadows Fall one.
Yeah. So he heard that, and then he contacted Alan, as Alan was kind of thinking about who would be good to do the album.
It was an interesting choice, wasn't it? Because Ian Brody, Lightning Seeds,
he was a bit of a lull as well at the time.
He was quite poppy as well, wasn't he? It was. I thought it was an unusual choice. Maybe it was a good contrast to the Corals, kind of like
so darker,
deep psychedelic. It's very hard to categorise a Coral, isn't it? You don't know where to put them, but you definitely know where to put Ian Brody.
Yeah,
and I thought that was an interesting, unusual pairing.
And he had good reason. I can't remember. I couldn't tell you what they were. You'd have had to ask him, but he wouldn't have done that lightly. He would have looked at that and looked at maybe what Ian had done previous to that and what he could bring to it with his style.
Rob Stringer was friends with Brody. He was friends
with him, but I don't think it had anything to do with that, other than maybe Ian may have given Rob a ring and said, what do you think? Shall I put my name? I don't know how it worked, but he did contact Alan direct, and Alan was like, you know what? And I think he had a little think about it and thought that could work. So,
because it was 2002, now 20 years ago, that the first album was recorded and released.
Yeah. I think that before the bloody internet was really out there properly, wasn't it? It was it was MySpace, I think. I was talking to James from the Coral recently, and he likened it to. He said, I don't think I'm exaggerating when I liken it to the difference between the transition from the silent movies to the talking pictures. He said it was that drastically different. The change from that to from the way things were done before to this online thing, and and then obviously it just went bonkers after that, didn't it?
But look at
massive.
Like cassettes or vinyl, then it went to cassettes being this whole new technology. Right, of condensing music into a small little unit. That's now obsolete. Right, CDs.
And then CDs, remember CDs, and that was like
the height of technology, wasn't it? Now that's obsolete. So we've gone through these technological innovations at rapid speed. I think we may settle on streaming for a while, because
I don't know
where else would you go from the stream?
No idea.
And maybe straight direct into the brain.
That's where it's going.
That's where it's going to get streamed.
But I think that transition around that time, it was with the internet, because it was only really I don't know when people really weren't commonly using.
It was the phone, wasn't it?
It was like 2000, like the end of the 90s, wasn't it? Really, when it started to kind of.
But I think it transformed with the iPhone, didn't it? That went the moment the internet was fully on phones,
and that's quite a long time. After that, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Well, not a long time, but it started around that point, and it was like we were still having one foot in the old system And then this transition was happening. And
there's no physical product anymore, is there?
No, it's not tangible.
It's like a,
and I didn't think I'd
a
like
virtual
that.
product.
Yeah, but I even I'm getting used to it because of the convenience of it. You know, I am used to
your whole collection's on your phone, isn't it?
Yeah. CDs can go in the bin.
So, okay, so tell us more about the recording of the Coral's first album, because it's hot right now, because it's 20 years ago.
20 years ago, yeah.
And I listened to it myself recently when I seen the video, and it was like, wow, that was such a powerful debut album from 5 kids.
Yeah.
That they were able to deliver this level of depth and musical quality.
Yeah.
It was just so good. It was so energetic, and I loved it. I loved being around it, and I loved being a part of it. It was just so cool. What was it like from your end?
Well, because we were kind of, I say we, I'm thinking of me, Nikki and Karen and the other people.
Because you were running the label behind the scenes. Alan was being all, visionary, wasn't it? You were on the nuts and bolts.
In the sort of backroom scenario, I mean, I will never, it was always Alan's label, and he always had a little thing that he didn't ever want it to be the Richard and Judy show. And I was like, I don't want to be Judy, so it was like, so it never was that. But he did need that behind him, because his brain was so like everywhere, like he couldn't be asked sitting down and doing detailed things. So so I was doing that with Nikki and Karen. So we were seeing it from a different perspective from them, as in the band, and like Alan and Ian and Joe and whoever else was involved. So but it was still exciting because there was such a buzz going on, and we had Sony ringing up every 5 minutes asking for this, that and the other. And I remember when Shadows Fall was, because it was being promoted at this, I can't remember now, but anyway, I remember when it first came on Radio 1, for some reason I was driving around Sefton Park with Nikki or Karen, and it came on Radio 1, Mark and Lard. And we were like, oh my God.
Remember when that was a thing, Radio 1?
Radio 1, afternoon play, Mark and Lard.
That's in the charts.
Couldn't bloody beat that. We put the windows down. We just were like, it was just bonkers. It was just so that was, it was the excitement around it. And then, there was just so much sort of, we were dealing with the press and all of that stuff. I was kind of liaising between the press and the band. At that point, the band were a bit scared of it all. Starting to get a little bit, whoa, this,
because it was quite a whirlwind, wasn't it? And everyone wanted to know who they were. Yeah. The attention was coming from all angles, and there was like this fame thing that was happening for the Coral. And I always got a sense that they were not really into that. They were just into the music and the vibe.
But they weren't being too cool for school. They really genuinely didn't know how to take that stuff, and they didn't know how to deal with it. And they were very young. They were kids, and they were kids they weren't city kids. They were out of town kids. And also, Bill was kind of a sensitive, he was fragile, he'd been through a tragedy in his life, his brother, he lost his brother. And I think they were very protective about him as well, like didn't want that to be delved into and make him feel... Because
he had a really good connection with Bill, because of their shared tragedy.
Yeah.
And Alan was able to, kind of coach him.
Guide him really and help him through, sort of...
Dealing with his own issues,
Yeah, so, I think he was quite philosophical and gave him some helpful advice and insights and stuff like that. So I think the Coral were they were just very not cautious exactly, but just a bit scared of it all, of the attention and making a mistake. I know James said I was frightened of making a mistake because we didn't know what to say or do, and we were frightened that we were so early we might make a mistake, say the wrong thing, and it'd be over. And they were quite goofy as well, weren't they? They weren't like trying to be Oasis and super cool and everything. They were goofy, they were funny, they had comedy to them, right? Which was really unusual for a band, because they're always trying to play over cool and super cool, and they didn't care at all. They were hilarious. If the right person was there, if it was some twit, who was being just annoying, they would kind of close down, and it would be like you could feel like you were out of the loop. But that's only, because you did get some idiots coming up and trying to interview them as well, just doing the job. But they didn't connect with everybody. But if they did, then you would see that funny side of them, that playful side.
So the album came out and it was well received. It got to number 5 in the charts.
Yeah, and they were touring loads. They were touring loads.
And you had 3 singles that came out. Tell us about the whole drama with the single choices, and because there was a lot of internal wrangling, wasn't there, between the band, Deltasonic, Sony, over choices between what singles to go with.
Well, Alan had always a very clear vision of how he thought that they should be developed. And he was very protective of that. And he thought that it shouldn't be too fast, too soon. He knew them as people. He knew what they were comfortable with. And he also wanted the cool side of it, if you want to put it that way. I mean, it was all cool what they did, but like the sort of maybe more avant-garde, he just wanted them to have a credible foundation before, because he knew they had some pop singles that would, brilliant pop singles, but might just change the tone a little bit. I think he wanted the tone of that first album to be consistent, and that was maybe the sort of darker side of things. So when Dreaming of You was kind of, it was such a fantastic single, and so obviously, a pop single and a potential hit, he was a bit worried that it would be a noose round, that he'd be described it as a noose round the neck that would, they would then have to make everything else live up to that.
There was debate whether that should even be on the first album, wasn't it?
Well, it was Alan who was talking. Alan was advising the band and saying, "I think this might be too quick. This is going to launch, and this is going to be a hit, and then we might get stuck with that. Then where we just got to be hit after hit, because that's what majors want. They want hits.
Of course,
and
Ian want the money back, don't they?
Ian's used to like pop stuff, hits and things like that. So I don't think he was part of that. Maybe part of that conversation. I don't know, but I know that Alan was quite sort of concerned that could push things too quickly before those foundations were set. So the band were with him on that, I think, pretty much. But obviously there was pressure from the label to, the major from Sony to kind of get the hits going.
Because I got a little bit of insight on that, because I was doing the videos for the first album, Skeleton Key, Dreaming of You and Goodbye. And I know that the marketing department didn't really want me doing it. They wanted one of their guys.
Their people.
Fair enough, right? And fortunately for me, the band wanted me to do it, and Alan wanted me to do it, so I was able to hold my position. But I could see a little bit of insight of how the marketing department at Sony wanted to go in a different direction than the band wanted to go, and Alan wanted to go. So there was this tension. There was like this strategy of tension going on between all the parties, and
because they're not looking necessarily at the bigger picture. I mean, we did have a great team with Sony, in all honesty, because we had Catherine,
Jason Guy, Catherine Craddock, Muff Winwood. Yeah.
And
they were all cool.
They were all brilliant people. But, there was this kind of... so it was really Dreaming of You was the main contention.
I feel so grateful that I got the gig on doing that video, because
such a brilliant video, isn't it?
Well, it's such a brilliant song, isn't it? It's a real classic song, and in that video, it was very difficult to, when you make a music video, you're meant to write a script, and then the script gets costed and everyone signs off on it, but the Coral weren't wanting to do that. It was kind of keep it loose and improvised. So I remember the treatment I wrote for it was something like 4 lines, and that had to be delivered to Sony, right? And they were like, well, what's it going to be? I said, just trust us. Just trust us, it'll be cool. They're not used to that. It needs to be all,
Yeah,
right. And I get that, and I understand where they were coming from with it, but, they had to just go with it because of the deal that Alan did and the leverage that he had as Deltasonic. He had autonomy, creative control.
Absolutely.
And I remember that video, and we did it in their rehearsal room, right? The main performance where they're in the corridor, that was their rehearsal room. With
all the posters, all
the
of their
collage on the wall, and it just looked really good. And we did that section there, and then there's a whole section that didn't make the edit, which we filmed in Bill's bedroom. All the band were in Bill's bedroom with all these different costumes on. That was quite cool. But probably the most memorable of Dreaming of You is the fact that we got Alan to be in the video.
What was who was the general? Playing? It was the general. It was an American general, wasn't it?
American general. Because that was how we did the video. I went to some prop house in Manchester and just went, right guys, let's get whatever we can get and stick it in the van.
Oh really? And that's how it was formed?
That's how it was formed. We just picked all the cool stuff we could find, put it in the van, and we went to a costume department, I think, in the BBC in Manchester, and picked a few costumes off. And
was Jay Melia in the bear?
Jay Melia was the bear.
Yeah.
And then Mark O'Leary was the judo guy, but Alan was the general.
Alan was the general, and he did his little Northern Soul skip.
Yeah.
In the dance.
I just feel grateful and lucky that I got that gig, but also that we were able to, immortalise him in that video.
It's hilarious, that, isn't it? It's so good. Yeah. Oh.
But so it was a bit of a challenge during the release of Dreaming of You. What do you think in hindsight about the decision to?
It's very difficult to know, isn't it? Because it could be. I mean, the second album, which we'll probably touch on, did really well. Went to #1. I think
Magic and Medicine.
Yeah. I think some majors think, well, you've got to go with your strongest stuff, you know, your pop stuff, your hits, because you might not get another opportunity. The whole thing might just flop, and then you don't get a second go. So that's wasted. Use all your full artillery. And I think Alan was like, we want this band to have longevity, and I know that they've got that capacity. I don't want to throw everything at it too soon, because that could, in another way, that could like wreck it. So I think in some ways, I think you could say that he was right. You don't know what would have happened had it been anything different. But what we do know is that they didn't get to the level that they could have because of various reasons, and that might be one of them. The fact that it did go too quick too soon, and they pulled back.
So they made some conscious creative decisions, didn't they? That they didn't want to be a pop band, as it were.
Yeah, I don't know whether that was what they were thinking as such. They wanted to do what they were doing and didn't want it to be a marketing team that led them.
They weren't that type of band, really.
No.
They were like a funny, cool, almost a bit gawky, you know?
Yeah, they were a bit geeky.
Geeky, yeah. They were just
they used
unusual.
to do their own little films, didn't they? When Alan first met them, like they'd be.
Ian was the filmmaker in the band, wasn't he?
And Nick's brother, Kev,
he was the photographer, great photographer.
And they'd go off to parks and like get dressed up as like donkey heads on and think. I think I might have imagined that, but I think they did. I don't know why I would imagine that.
Well, that can
and,
be
axes coming out the bushes and things.
Well, again, we continued that theme for the third single on the album, which was Goodbye. And it was my goodbye as well.
Yeah.
That was the end of my particular phase of the band. It was great. I loved it. I've only got amazing memories of it. But we did the Wicker Man.
Yeah.
And it was a development of the whole English pagan.
Yeah, because that was quite an
deep
element
English
of this.
pagan.
Yeah.
That was always a flavour.
Wasn't it?
Yeah, and it kind of really went well with the band. I think that theme.
I remember that.
It was
when we were talking about doing that, and do you remember we nearly got Christopher Lee in?
Yeah, so we tried to get actually get Christopher Lee.
We did speak to his manager.
He was game.
Yeah,
right? He was going to do it.
He was on board, wasn't
but Peter Jackson beat us to it because he cast him in Lord of the Rings.
Thanks for making that decision.
Yeah,
with that
we didn't get Christopher Lee. But yeah, that was a real challenging shoot.
Yeah,
because it was like a big day in Wales, and it was in Flintshire. And I remember before we headed over, we had this 30-foot Wicker Man built, and an exact replica of the one in the film.
Same.
Yeah, and I remember before we were going over, the heavens were pouring down upon the location. I thought, we're never going to burn this. It's raining. And as we got to the location, the clouds cleared. It was like, yeah. And it was a long day, and the police, it turned into a local event in Flintshire. Hundreds of people turned up to this music video. I'm like, oh my God, no, look at all these people. Yeah, and then the police turned up and said, you're going to have to finish the shoot in 3 hours. And I was like, well, we've got another 8 hours to go. What do you mean, 3 hours? No, you got to finish the shoot.
And it wasn't dark.
So it got dark, so we had to rush through it. And then as we're rushing through it, in the song, James does a countdown to 1. And at 1, that's when the Wicker Man was meant to explode. So I'm saying to the pyrotechnic guy, I was going, make sure it explodes on 1. We've got one shot at this, right? One shot, one camera, and we had a Super 8 camera. So my enthusiasm rubbed off on him, and he doused it. He absolutely doused it with too much petrol.
Oh my God.
But we got what we wanted, and on 1. He lit it, it exploded.
Boy,
perfect.
Did it explode.
Yeah, and if you watch the video, you can see, I think it's Lee, he looks round at the fire like that.
And it actually singed Ian's hair.
It singed really Ian's hair, and
health and safety
it took a week to build, priority. And it burned within
seconds,
minutes. It was gone. It was gone. But yeah, really memorable shoot. Well. Really memorable shoot. But that was the end of my particular part of the journey with Coral, and it was great. Yeah, I loved it. But so the album is a major success. Everyone in the country was talking about them. Probably the best band, I think, from that period. From
Noel Gallagher was a massive fan. Loads of sort of credible, well-known artists who were kind of speaking up about them and like not influenced, but well, there were some influence by them, but also just kind of talking about them in interviews and stuff, and really.
So Alan delivered, the Coral delivered, Deltasonic was on the map.
Yep.
Liverpool was bouncing because there was this music revival going on in
Yeah,
the city
yeah.
at the time. So
Yeah.
it wasn't just what Alan was doing. There was like Gary Bandit and the Bandits were running Bandwagon.
Well, the bandwagon, which is where they kind of initially were sort of all playing at one
That was the
time
hub,
or
wasn't
another.
it?
It was
The
kind of
live
a hub where
venue.
they all got to know each other originally. Yeah.
Yeah, that became legendary in its own right, the Bandwagon.
Yeah, and Gary had the Bandits,
the Bandits,
as well, didn't he? Which
yeah.
is why it was called the Bandwagon, I suppose.
Great friend of mine, did a few videos for them too.
He's a good
And it was just a brilliant time for guitar music. It was like what Alan talked about. It was the beginning of a revival of guitar music after a bit of a lull, and it was, you know, at the beginning of that wave.
And I think
really,
that's around the time the Strokes, or maybe they were just a little bit before, but it was kind of, because I know James was saying that when Alan came along, you know, when he was talking about releasing Shadows Fall and stuff, and he was you know, he was basically saying the Strokes are, you know, everybody's like kicking off about the Strokes. He said, but you're better. He said, you know, we're going to go for it. So they were part of that sort of revival.
So it wasn't just the Coral though. So it wasn't just a one-hit wonder. Then came the Zutons.
Then the Zutons,
and I haven't heard the Zutons' first album for ages. And I listened to it recently before we did this, and it's so good. It really is so good. There's so many really great tracks on it. It was another great record. And tell us about what you remember of the Zutons and working with the Zutons and how they came about, because there was something quite unique about the Zutons. Abby being one of the things.
She came along a little bit later. Well, before it kicked off, but she wasn't initially in the band, and I think Alan was he must have found out. Obviously, Sean and Abby. Well, not obviously, but Sean and Abby were a couple, so that's how kind of Abby was in the circle, and she was playing sax. I don't know whether she was doing it anywhere else or just learning how to play it. And there was talk about, you know, maybe she should join the band, but Alan was really keen on that because the four lads in a band in Liverpool's just been done so much. It was just so boring.
Well, it was quite what made it unique, wasn't it? There was a real interesting twist.
Abby in, you know, gorgeous, glamorous, you know, just bring that little sparkle into this band, which otherwise would have been, you know, sounding great but looking a bit boring. Maybe no offence, lads, if you're watching, but
I'm sure
they would agree.
Yeah, but what was interesting was about the because they were, you know, getting compared to the Coral, weren't they? In terms of, like, you know, they were friends, they were in the same label and the same style of music, but it was a lot different. And
I think what happened there was that the press, the music media, which we don't really have now, but what we had then was certain publications. I mean, NME was the main one, and they like to have a scene. They like to have it all written, don't you? So
they know where to categorise everything,
and then you box them into the scene, and then you pitch them against each other and start a bit of competition. So I think they threw something in there that was a little bit, you know, unnecessary, that kind of looked like the Zutons and the Coral were rivals, and they weren't. They were friends. So they all got a little bit annoyed about, not with each other, with the press. It was like, what are they talking about, you know? So, but they were, very different. They were, I don't know how you would describe the difference, but just totally different, really.
I think whereas the Coral may have been hesitant to go down the more commercial route, commercial being the wrong term, but it's the only one I can think of really, is that the Zutons weren't, where they were game. They
were more, you know, they were more poppy probably, you know, anyway. And they were full on, you know, let's go for it. With, you know, they still wanted to keep the, you know, the sort of creative integrity, or they just happened to be writing more sort of, I suppose, pop songs really, you know. And obviously Valerie being one of them.
So not many people know that, do they, really? That is Amy Winehouse's probably most famous song. It was written by Dave McCabe. Of the Zutons. And he's done okay from that.
I think he's done all right with that.
Is right, Dave.
So that, you know, they've had a brilliant career. They really have, you know, and they've toured the world and they've recorded in different places.
They really went for it, didn't they?
They really did, you know, and they weren't afraid to, you know, to do stuff and kind of, you know, play with the look and all the rest of it, and like videos, you know, it was all quite sort of.
And they followed it up with a really good second album as well, because there's some even stronger songs on the second album than the first. Maybe not as I think the first album was more consistent, whereas the second album maybe a little bit more patchy, but some really strong songs
tracks,
on it. And so they delivered again. And then how was that received in Sony and? I think
it was really, I mean, Muff Winwood was a real champion of the Zutons. He absolutely loved them. So he was there and, you know, in the background kind of, you know, sort of just, he was their man in Sony. You know, Rob Stringer was probably more Coral. Muff Winwood was more Zutons.
Just a little bit of rivalry within Sony itself.
No, I don't think it was that. I think Rob just didn't have enough, time and hands. And I think Muff Winwood just literally loved them. And so was just kind of wanting to be involved on that level.
And how was the relationship with Sony and Alan at that point? Because, Alan knew the strength he had and the leverage he had in the deal and enjoyed playing the Maverick and enjoyed making autonomous decisions, even sometimes at the chagrin of some Sony executives.
Yeah.
How was that relationship
I think
navigated?
It was all right for quite a while because he was making good decisions.
While you're selling records.
And it was all working. It changed really when Rob Stringer left. I can't quite remember when that was in terms of like record releases and stuff like that. But when Rob left and he went to America and then a new team came in, it wasn't the same. Alan had a real strong relationship with that team and with Rob. And Rob, he had full respect from Rob.
Okay.
And not to say he didn't when the other people came in, but
when do you reckon that was? That halfway through the deal?
Yeah, maybe. It's difficult to remember now when that
because
exactly
a new
happened.
brush sweeps clean, doesn't it? They say.
Yeah, it was difficult. It really was because they didn't know Alan from the beginning, and they just come in. And also, don't forget there's egos involved. People want to make their mark, and so they want to be seen to be making decisions rather than just coming in and going, "Yeah, Alan, do whatever." So I think there was a little bit of, a struggle going on there when the new people came in.
Because it wasn't just the Coral or the Zutons. There was the Dead 60s as well.
Dead 60s as well,
Great ska band.
Yeah, brilliant.
Got a good relationship with them. I did quite a few music videos for them too. Went to Japan with the Dead 60s.
Did you go with them?
Went to Japan and did a video on the streets of Tokyo, which was amazing.
They were so brilliant.
Really cool lads.
Really good, yeah.
Really cool lads.
And so they were part of that whole thing. So it was all, it was all pretty good.
Yeah.
And
they were quite big in America when they did the Dead 60s. They had a break on American radio. I think Riot Radio.
It was Riot Radio.
It got the third most played indie track in America, something like that, yeah.
Well, they eventually had an American manager, and how that came about was Rob Stringer, because they didn't really have like a formal manager. It was Alan doing everything really, but they didn't really need it at that point because we had Sony and they were part of that thing. But then Rob Stringer played, I don't know whether it was Riot Radio or something, to Peter Mensch, who's like a big manager over there. I think he was Metallica, Chili Peppers, we had several other massive bands, and he loved them. And he came over. I remember him coming actually to Liverpool with Rob Stringer to, I think it might have even been the opening of the office, because we didn't have the office straight away. It was like a bit later. I can't remember anyway. But he came with Rob, came to see us in the office and came to meet the band and then had them out there.
It's quite a big deal getting Peter Mensch to be your manager.
Well, he's pretty big, isn't he? Really, and it was him. It wasn't like he was being chased. He was just, he just played it and loved it, and he was the one who came to them, and they had a really good time with him. And interestingly, other people, we've said about Deltasonic being kind of a sort of starting point for a lot of people's careers in different areas. And there was one guy, Keith O'Neill, drummer from Cast.
Yeah.
He was tour managing. I think maybe Alan had got him in to tour manage a couple of the bands, possibly. I can't remember who, but I think Dead 60s might have been one of them. So he ended up working for Peter Mensch's Q Prime company, and he got really, he got into tour management that way, I think, properly. So
there was loads of people.
Launchpad for him.
Yeah, there was, obviously myself. There was Scott Jones, amazing designer, amazing graphic designer. Someone I've worked with myself closely over the years. Cool guy.
Oh, so lovely. Yeah, he's just done loads, and he helped me set up the website, which we're reworking on at the moment. But he
did some classic designs, didn't he?
Some brilliant
the
designs,
Zutons one. Did he do the Zutons with the 3D?
I think. Oh God, I can't remember which one he did, but he's done some Zutons.
Scott, if you didn't do that, I'm sorry.
Sorry, Scott. He did some really good ones.
He did amazing stuff. Yeah, but he did Arctic Monkeys as well, didn't he?
Yeah. Again, through that sort of meeting of well, Alan was after the Arctic Monkeys and almost there. He was like right at the front.
So I didn't know that. I didn't know he got really close to signing the Arctic Monkeys.
He was in for the Arctic Monkeys very, very early. He he got onto them, like really, I can't remember whether, it might have even been Joe who mentioned the Arctic Monkeys to Alan. And I think they went to see them and he was like, they are just brilliant. He could see straight away, really early, that they were going to be massive. And he was banging on Sony. He was like, come on, we've got to do this. Will you just back me up? I've got to get this deal. And they were a little bit hesitant.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And he was like, come on, can't you see it? And they were like, I'm not sure. And
Domino got it.
And Domino, yeah, I don't think it was just because of the hesitation, though. I think I don't know why they went with Domino. I think maybe they just didn't want to go with Sony and they knew Sony was involved. I don't know what the decision was behind that, but they went with Domino. And they did all right. But we could have also done all right.
But there was also a little spin-off that you were able to benefit from, wasn't there? Which is the Last Shadow Puppets, which was Miles Kane.
So yeah, how that
Miles
happened.
Kane was in the Little Flames,
He was in
another
the
band I
Flames
worked
and
with.
Rascals.
That's right. So the Little Flames, wasn't it? But they were involved as well.
Yeah, that's right. So there was Little Flames. So there was Matt and Eva, who Alan knew, and they were kind of doing this kind of cool stuff. And then there was they needed a band really. So Alan knew Miles, Greg and Joe, probably through the Coral, I think, because they were from the Wirral and stuff. So he put them together, formed the Little Flames, and then he was in with, for the Arctic Monkeys, and so he kind of knew them. I think it was probably their first tour. He got the Little Flames to support the Arctic Monkeys. They got the support slot for that. So they went up. Miles then makes friends with Alex during that tour. Incidentally, Jamie, my son, had his first venture into touring with a band. He went out with the Arctic Monkeys and Little Flames and did the lighting.
Cool.
Learned how to do the lighting.
Yeah, you tell me.
Yeah. So so that's how that's how Miles met Alex Turner, and then they developed a stronger friendship, obviously over the course of a couple. I don't know how long it went, and then they decided to do an album of their own, which was the Last Shadow Puppets.
But didn't Deltasonic get a piece of the action there?
Well, we had publishing. Yeah. And there was probably some. There was a deal done as well.
Was that in some ways kind of like a not a payoff, but like a thank you, or sorry we didn't sign with you, but we can do this with you instead?
No, I don't think so. I think it was just it had to be done. It was legal.
Okay.
Simple as that, really.
But why did you get the publishing? I mean, why did Deltasonic get the publishing deal with the Last Shadow Puppets?
I think because Alan had the publishing for Miles.
Ah, okay.
So it wasn't full publishing. There was he had a share of the publishing. So it was that, because he already signed the Little Flames, because we had a publishing arm as well. So we already had that. So it was just contractual. Yeah.
So there was loads of other bands as well, wasn't there? There was the Suzukis.
Suzukis, one of my favourites.
Long Cut.
I love all of them, obviously.
Yeah.
But yeah, Suzukis, who were slated by the music press later on. At first, when we did the first EP, Reducer, I think it was. I think some people got it. It was quite harsh, it was hard, it was northern, it was gritty, like they were, and
there was no compromise from them.
No,
was it,
they were genuine though. There was no messing about. They were just I just loved that about them. Sort of Shoreditch types just didn't quite get it. No, they thought they were pretending.
Too northern for them.
Somebody actually said, I did get involved. Like I got so annoyed because I really knew how genuine they were and how brilliant they were, and also at the time there was like the politics that was going on. I can't even quite remember what it was, but I know there was a need for an angry band, and they were it, and like nobody was listening. And I was like, why is nobody listening? And I remember one press guy was like, they're just bloody wearing parkas, and like it's all, like as if they were pretending to be northern with parkas. And I was like, it's cold, they're in the rain, and they're wearing parkas because that's what they wear every day. It's just like
There's only so much space for northern bands really in the whole, the well-controlled middle-class operation, isn't it?
And I just think they weren't ready. They didn't want an angry band.
No.
They just wanted something like cool to get involved with, and they weren't it.
But there was loads of cool bands. There was loads of
the Basement.
The Basement. I forgot about the Basement. Yeah.
Kings of Leon. I think was it the Kings of Leon? They were just starting out. I think it was the Kings of Leon, or was it the Black Rebel Motorcycle Club? It was one of them that was like dead. It might have been the Black Rebel Motorcycle Club, and it was at the same time, and they were playing, in London, and it just they just. I don't know. The media just went for that. There was no competition really, because the Basement were brilliant, but they were kind of a bit more ramshackle, and the other bands just. It was ready for big stuff, so the press went with the big stuff.
It was the last great era for guitar music in Liverpool, the Deltasonic period, because there hasn't been one after it, has there?
No, I don't think so.
It was the last great period of guitar music.
Yeah. Don't know whether that'll come back. Who knows? It's like you see the cycles that Alan used to talk about were in a different world before streaming and before you know the different sort of landscape.
It's either guitar music has gone for good, or it's going to be
incorporated within,
or
like,
it's a very niche genre of music which is like a subculture.
Yeah,
you know. But whether
or it's just sampled.
Unless Oasis make a comeback, and if Oasis made a comeback, you know, that might kickstart a whole genre again. Who knows?
Possibly, maybe there'll be a backlash because people. Yes, I don't know. Maybe there's something that people would get from it that they don't even know, that kids don't even know exists.
Guitars.
Guitars, yeah. What?
What are they? My dad used to play around with. Okay, so there was amazing golden period. It was like you had the Midas touch to a large degree. Loads of great bands coming through, loads of great music being created, culture being created, careers being launched. It was just fantastic. And then it became more difficult and the struggle began, largely due to the new head at Sony. And then that was probably towards the tail end of the 7-year deal, wasn't it? Maybe the last 2 years, 2.5 years.
Yeah, I think it was.
And then that became more of a fight and more of a constant struggle working with Sony. And in some ways, both parties watching the clock to some degree. But
seeing the deal.
How long's left? You know, so tell us about that. What do you remember about that?
Well, I mean, I remember Alan getting more and more frustrated by it, you know, the whole thing. And like, I remember, and you know Alan, and like part of we were talking about his character, he would not beat around the bush. If he was like, you know, if he had something to say, he didn't care who it was to, what level they were at, he would just say it.
But I loved that about him. I loved going to get a direct feedback from Alan. Yeah,
because you knew it was true. You knew it was genuine, and he wasn't bullshitting you. He wasn't like that.
It was great because, you know, Alan loved to talk.
Yeah.
Alan loved to talk, right? And I'd spend many, many hours sitting in Kinsella's.
Just talking about the maddest stuff.
But it wasn't
not
just music. Yeah,
no,
he was into
universe.
History, he was into politics, he was into money creation, he was into all the cool red pill stuff that we talk about now. Alan was on it.
He was on it.
Like, and that's why I just loved his company. And we spent untold hours just chatting about that stuff.
He loved that. We had Jehovah's Witnesses came to the door
they
once.
Run?
No, because they weren't allowed to run because he had them. Because he wouldn't stop talking, and he wasn't doing it. You know, like some people go, "Oh yeah, I was trying to," and you know, I wound them up. Yeah. He wasn't winding them up. He wanted to know their view on the universe and universal energy and like where it all came from and all the rest of it. And they got way more than they bargained for, and they couldn't leave because it was like. And I even recorded some of it. I need to try and find that because it was so funny.
That'd be amazing
it was
if you
genuinely, could. It came. He had an innocence. That's what I wanted to say about Alan. Even though he had this kind of, he was bombastic in a lot of ways, and he was very straight talking, and he was
a truth seeker.
Yeah,
he was a truth seeker,
and he could maybe cut people with his honesty sometimes, but he didn't mean to. He didn't mean to hurt people. He had an innocence. It's like sometimes like a child would say stuff and you're like, oh, don't say that. But he would just say it because it was true. And so that was why, you know, with the Jehovah's Witnesses, he didn't mean to like, you know, be horrible or, you know, he just wanted to, he wanted to know stuff. And, but, you know, the flip side of that was, you know, he would go down to Sony, for example, and he'd go into a meeting and they'd all be talking, you know,
corporate nonsense.
You'd be like, right, what's it? I think it was like singer-songwriters were out at the time, you know, like a load of them, like it was one after the other. And I think it was kind of you know, this meeting, this A&R meeting, it was something about like, well, you know, anybody got anything to say about, you know, who's going to be the next, or anyone got one or something like that, you know. And I think, I don't know whether they asked him his opinion. Probably wouldn't have done that because they'd know they'd get more. But I think he was in the room and, you know, maybe they said, Alan, what's your thoughts on this? You know, they were talking about A&R and how and he said something like, so what would it was like, what would you do in this scenario? Yeah. What would I do? Right, okay, so, well, I get, you know, A&R team and I get shut of them. They're all in the room. Get rid of them and start again. He said, because you go nowhere with this. He said, this is barking up the wrong. He said, what are you all talking about? You know, this is just
But
not
like
getting
you say,
anywhere.
he was too honest for them, wasn't
Yeah, and that didn't go down too well, I'm sure, you know, because you're burning bridges at that point with all of them. But it was so frustrated with listening to them, just talking.
I used to sit there sometimes and think, how can you even, how do you run a label as well? How are you able to do all of this and sit and chat to me for hours? And
be an expert on football, which he never knew anything about until Sonny started playing football.
He was a Man U fan, wasn't he?
That's Wales, though, isn't it? He wasn't really.
Yeah.
And, you know, and he didn't know anything about football. But when Sonny started playing football, he became an expert because he could become he said, give me 6 weeks and I'll be an expert on anything.
Yeah.
And, you know, Jamie, who was into football, couldn't believe that Alan was like,
knew what he was talking about with football.
And he's like, how do you know? It's a sponge. He just used to, you know, soak it all up. So, so that struggle in the, you know, at that period was, you know, he was getting frustrated and it was coming out in situations like that in meetings. And he was just like, and then I remember another time when it came out this was nothing to do with Sony at the time, but it was kind of towards that end period, and he'd found this other band, Dustland, which, you know, we'll probably talk about, but he was so passionate about this kid, the band, the band. It was really unusual. It was quite electronic, I think. There was only 3 of them, and Adam was the front man, and he was so cool.
He looked like a 1950s movie star.
He did. Yeah. He was just so brilliant looking and very sort of charismatic. And you know, when Alan introduced him to labels, he just had that thing, and they were all like, "Oh God!" He was magnetic. People wanted to know him, and so Alan was really, you know, sort of pushing for this. And they played a show in Liverpool, and it was a couple of labels who came up, a couple of A&R. They may have been from Sony, I can't remember. But I remember them coming up, and it was just like, it was a big anticlimax. He thought they would get it, and he thought they would be excited. And they didn't. And they said, they're all right, but, you know, it's early days. And he lost his shit. That
was like the kiss of death, wasn't it? It's early days.
I think it was because he was becoming frustrated with the business, with the industry, not the business.
He was becoming a bit jaded with it all, would you say?
Yeah, he was, because it was like a bit of a slog at that point, and it was like, don't say that to me now. And, you know, and I think he just thought they just didn't know. And he said Joe always laughs about it because Joe was with him, and he got quite like, because he wasn't an angry man, Alan, he was quite sort of, you know, but he was like, "You're just weird," he said to them. "You're just weird. You just don't get it. You're just weird." And then anyway, Joe was like, "Oh, you know, chill out, Alan." And he was like, "No, they're just full of shit. They don't get it." So it was all kind of that, you know, end of thing. But the funny thing about that was, so he got himself so worked up, and he was like, "You're weird." So they got off, you know, like quick. And then we were driving home, and Alan just got himself into such a frenzy of anger about this thing. And he went, "And I'm just not having it." He said, "They're just full of shit, and I'm Alan Wills, and I'm back." And I was like, "Okay, Alan."
Well, okay. So before we get to Alan's back, we've first got to get to the end of Sony, because the amazing deal, which just transformed Liverpool, it really did, and it was down to his genius in negotiating that deal. It had a term, and that term came to an end. Yeah, and.
So they thought.
So they thought, but he squeezed another year out of it. So it was a 7-year deal.
Like, I think you'll find.
And he found a technicality in it, then got another year out.
Great, thank you, Sony.
Okay, right. So good that they went with it. Yeah. So it came to an end. Did it end? Was it an acrimonious ending?
No,
or was
not really. I think everyone was ready for it.
Yeah, okay. So new challenges ahead for everyone.
I think he wouldn't have said no if somebody.
Of course.
That he respected in the business had said, "What about another, you know, load of money?" And he probably would have said, "Yeah," but I think he knew that it was coming to an end. He wasn't really working well with the team in there, and he was quite ready for new challenges, I think. And
a new phase began, which was Deltasonic being a truly independent label. Well, again, because it was like that before Sony, wasn't it?
Yeah, although thinking about it, it wasn't really, because there was always the thought that was, you know, it was very close to Sony being involved, so it didn't really have
kind of launched together, if you like, on the back of the deal.
That was fully independent because there was no sign of Sony then, so so this was like properly you're on your own now.
So things become a bit difficult because you don't have the energy resource of the major label pumping cash into the project.
Plus the marketing and, you know, the promotion and the network and stuff.
So Alan's kind of trying to rediscover his magic.
Yeah.
Find the golden Midas touch once again. And he's searching around, trying to find new acts. Tell us about that period, because I remember Alan then, and I remember him. You know, he was looking at other projects as well, wasn't he, at the time? Yeah, and I could see that he was just waiting for the next wave to come along, and he was like a surfer, just waiting patiently to catch it.
I think he'd had a little bit of time out thinking, you know what, it might be actually more fun selling widgets, because you know where you are with widgets, and you haven't got, you know, and then, but that, he soon got bored with that idea and thought, no, I want music. So then it was like full on, you know, radar out and stuff.
Yeah.
And
so we started picking up bands as an independent label.
Yeah.
It was Dustland, wasn't it?
Dustland.
I think it was the first one that came along.
Yeah, they were. I think they were in the Battle of the Bands, if I remember rightly, in Liverpool, and I think Alan was on the panel of that. I think he was anyway. So he recognised that they were good, and then I think he got Jamie in to help out with them.
Yeah, that's right, because Jamie's done a bit of co-managing then as well. That's right. In fact, that's what happened.
Remember that?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was that. So they were kind of, you know, developing, and then around that time as well.
Yeah, so I come back into the story again a little bit. I mean, I was never out the story. I was always doing music videos in some shape or form, and there'd be a few years where I wouldn't see him, or I'd do other things. But it was always wove in and out of the Deltasonic story. But I think it was 2011, maybe. I kind of wanted to try my hand at band management, right? And I've done a few crazy things in my life, and that was one of them. I had a couple of bands, and I went to Heebie Jeebies, which is a bar in Liverpool, and I was on the lookout, sniffing for music, and I found this band called The Dirty Rivers, and they just blew me away. They were just amazing. Yeah. It reminded me of the Coral in terms of like the energy that they had on the stage, and they had probably the best frontman I'd seen in ages. Yeah, so good. But be careful what you wish for. Mikey. So I was so excited about them, and after the gig I'd done the pitch and got them on board and started working with them a little bit, and then I told Alan about it. I said, Alan, you've got to see this band. And up to that point he was like, okay, I was sending him stuff and he wasn't really interested, and I could see that I hadn't impressed him yet.
Come and see them.
So come and see them. So he came to see Dirty Rivers, and that was it. Then
he said to me, gotta come and see this band, and I think we both came. I might have even been on that night.
Maybe, but it was a really interesting period in my relationship with Alan, because both Mikey and Alan could have easily said, look, we're going to go together, thanks for the introduction, here's a little drink or whatever, but that didn't happen. And Mikey showed some loyalty, and Alan said, look, do you want to co-manage with me? I was like, yeah, of course. So I was co-managing for a while with Alan on the Dirty Rivers, and it was an interesting period, because up to that point I'd been his friend and maybe the videographer of some of the Deltasonic's work, but this time I was like a business partner, right? And I got a lot of insight into how the music industry worked from the management label perspective, and there was lots of labels that were really excited about the Dirty Rivers, and they were coming to see them. A few of them said it's early days. And it was just a real privilege to work that closely with them for a period. But unfortunately, I had other things pulling my attention, other crazy things, and another, my story went off in a different direction. And I said, look, Alan, I don't think I can give this the commitment that it needs. You and the Dirty Rivers, you do it together, and best of luck, I hope it works out for you. And I went off and did something else, and he took over the full management of the band, and you were all over it as well. And tell us a bit about from that point where you took it from Dirty Rivers and developed it into something different, didn't you? Yeah,
well, the Dirty Rivers was it was quite sort of raucous. How would you describe the Dirty Rivers?
Dirty rock and roll.
Dirty, grungy rock and roll. Yeah. It was so good.
Garage rock and roll,
and when they were getting some attention.
Mikey was just a really electric frontman.
He had a bit of a Mick Jagger thing going on, didn't he? And some other
a little
sort of
arrogant bastard he was.
He certainly was.
Yeah, but that was what you needed. That's what he was.
Cheeky little.
He was just so good.
He did.
But he was like that off the stage as well. Yeah. It wasn't an act.
No,
it wasn't an act.
So it was, it was going well. But what Alan noticed, which is where his his talent came in, was that he noticed that So there was Mikey. Originally there was Mikey with, I think, Jay. And the other, the other
Lloyd,
three.
Ryan,
so Lloyd,
and Ben, wasn't
Ryan
it?
and Ben. Ben was the drummer. And then when Jay left, and then Louis came in as the guitarist, Alan noticed that there was a different vibe coming in from, the others were writing more, and it was kind of blending and changing, and it was becoming more sort of psychedelic and sort of, atmospheric and colourful, and I don't know whether subtle's the right word, but it wasn't as full on. It was just this psychedelic vibe was coming in, and he said, what they're doing is really good. He said, I'm much preferring that. He said, I think there's something that we could really do with this. And so he was working on that and developing that. And
it transformed the band, though, didn't it? From this kind of, not basic, but, grungy garage rock and roll
sort of
to this quite sophisticated and subtle psych rock
beautiful
band.
music was coming out.
And when I'd see him, he would be so excited about that band, and I got the sense that he thought this was the comeback.
Yeah,
he was on the comeback trail.
There was something more there. There was maybe something,
and he was setting it up in a way that was maybe similar to the Coral deal with Deltasonic. I could see in his head that
he was thinking maybe this might be.
I got a feeling that he was buzzed up from it, basically.
Yeah, and he was interested to see where it could develop further. They were going to have a club night. I think they were talking about doing a club night, like a regular thing, and they were going to call it the Vryll Society. And so we had I can picture what we had in mind already. Like it was just going to be an amazing club night, and that was going to be that kind of their launch, and they would have been ready by then.
I felt as if he'd got his hunger again, and he was re-energized after a period of being a bit jaded, and it was like he'd found something that got him excited, because that's what he was interested in, wasn't he?
And they had an energy, Mikey was like just full on wired with energy, wasn't he? The others were more sort of laid back, and they were kind of more sort of they were the ones that brought the psychedelic element to it, really, and they were a little bit more sort of a bit more laid back. But he could see that there was a talent there, and that it was turning into something really interesting. So he was going with that.
And unfortunately, this is like where things take a sharp turn. I remember getting a call. I think it was from Joe. Saying Alan's had an accident, had a road accident. He's in hospital, serious, and to get down as quick as I could. I did stop what I was doing, got there as quick as I could, and it was an eerie experience. It was like a gig, in a sense.
All the bands were there,
everyone was there. Everyone was there,
except me.
Yeah, so you pick it up then from what happened from your end.
So we were in France because we were going to move. We had a little place in France, Nice, outside Nice, Saint Paul de Vence, and our son Sonny. It was in his last year of juniors, and we knew we had this place, and we thought, you know what, maybe we should just decamp there for a bit, get him into school in the village, and then he'll be, fluent in French, and then we'll come back and he can go to grammar school or whatever it was we were planning for him at that point. So, and then Alan was going to, sort of commute. EasyJet, he was just going to commute, backwards and forwards. So we did that. We'd only just gone, actually, about 2 weeks before. It was around Easter time. So we went down. Alan came down. He followed us down. Sonny and I went down. Alan followed us down in the car with the dog, brought Barky down. And then he had to go back because a couple of reasons. I think Sound City was on that, the festival was on that weekend. And also, I think he needed to see Dirty Rivers, Stroke Serotonin and Dustland. He had things to do. And so he was coming. So he went back to Liverpool. So the last I saw of him, consciously as such, was seeing him off in Nice at the airport. So then I go back to the house, and then I can't remember how long he'd been back in Liverpool. And it was a Thursday night, and I always watch Question Time, and Sonny and I were he was in bed with me, and I was watching Question Time, and the phone went, and it was Alan, or I thought it was Alan, and I was like, oh, bloody hell, Alan, I'm watching Question Time, it's on. And it wasn't, it was the police. And they said, I can't, it was such a mad situation, I can't remember everything they said, but I do remember that they said, no, this is the police, don't worry, I don't know why they said that, but they probably just wanted me to be calm. And then they just said, there's you know, do you know Alan Wills? And I was like, yes, I'm his partner. You need to come down to the hospital straight away because he's been in an accident and he's in, Aintree, Fazackley, whatever it was. And I said, well, I'm in France, I can't. And I wanted them to tell me, so I was going, what's happened? Tell me. And they wouldn't they didn't want to freak me out too much. So we were saying, no, just calm down. But you do need to get here quickly, you know, you do need, because, you know, it is serious, but we need you to, you know, we need to be there. It was at 11 o'clock at night or something like that. And I'm in France and I've got Sonny and there was no way of getting there. I was thinking, shall I drive? You know, and Sonny ran to the neighbours and got the neighbour and I was just like running around going, oh my God. And the neighbour took us to the airport about, 4 a.m, because we just thought we just got to get whatever plane is the next plane out. I'm not sure what time, but it was like, they probably started about 6 o'clock or something. The only flight was to London. Otherwise, we'd have had to wait for ages. So Sonny was like asleep on the bench in the airport, and there was an absolute dickhead, you know, on British Airways who was being so insensitive and so not bothered at all. You could see the state we were in, and he was just like so dismissive. It was horrible. I would have complained, but I just didn't get around to it. And it was just a horrible nightmare. And we were in the airport, and then the plane was going about 6 o'clock, so we had to get on that. And then that meant we had to travel across London, you know, to get the train home. So it was an epic journey, and all the way.
Oh God!
You know, I'm thinking, don't die. You don't. Oh, it was awful. And obviously, Sonny was only 10, so he didn't quite know. He knew there was something wrong because he could hear like on the phone. So that was just absolute nightmare. And then we got on the train, we got off at Warrington, Bank Key, and Joe Fearon and his brother Ray were there to pick us up. And, you know, they obviously didn't want to tell me how bad things were because it was bad, but they didn't want to tell me that. So they said, come on, we'll, you know, take you to the hospital, and the doctors just want to have a word with you when we get there, we'll take you in, and the doctor just want to explain to you what's going on. So I said, okay. And still thinking, because of Alan being who he was, I didn't even know how bad the injuries were, but I fully thought that he would be okay. I just thought, no, you know, don't...
He'll pull through like he pulled through
because
everything
the
else.
energy of him was just so powerful. I thought, no, it'll be okay. So I wasn't letting myself to, you know, think that it might not be. I was just in this like adrenaline, a panic, horrible, just, you know, nightmare. So we get to the hospital and it's all just a big, as you said, you know, like a surreal, weird, there was, you know, and I remember now it's just like faces and familiar faces like coming and going, and I'm like just in this mist of madness, and I'm seeing people, hi.
And they're in the lift, they're in the corridor, they're on the bed.
Yeah, Peasy and Al,
it was so strange.
All these people like around, and I don't know how long I was there before I went in to see the doctor. You know, I think Joe must have said, oh, you know, come on, they want to speak to you. So, and I remember there were 3 of them, 2 consultants and this woman. And I don't really remember what they said too much, but they were trying to explain what the injury was, because he had a head injury. It was a really bad head injury because he'd gone head first off his bike at quite, you know, it must have been, he was doing probably 25, 30 miles an hour. And he said he didn't have a helmet on. And so it was, you know, the swelling on the brain had like happened quite rapidly. I think he'd had a cardiac arrest at the scene, and there happened to be an ambulance nearby, and they'd resuscitated, you know, still unconscious, but they'd got the heart going again. So they were explaining to me that, you know, they thought that it was probably, you know, his brain stem was probably not going to recover. So, but I wasn't hearing this. I was just hearing he's still alive. What's happening then? Yeah. What are you going to do about that? And, you know, so they were kind of just explaining it to me. And then I just remember they weren't giving me, they weren't giving me any hope. They were just kind of, you know,
you wanted to just switch the machine off, didn't they?
Yeah, they knew that there was no hope, but I wasn't ready to just give up at that point, because I thought, you don't know him, so don't be telling me that's the end, because you don't know. And I know he believes in magic, and I know that, you know, there's any way that he can come back in some way or that he will do it, so just bear with him. So I'm kind of thinking, I wasn't thinking like that. I was just thinking, don't tell me that. We need some time
here. What are the
here.
answers? Yeah.
And then this woman says, she must have just got a little bit, I sensed she got a bit frustrated with my sort of, you know, like not wanting to
accept their opinion.
Yeah. And she said, you do realise he's going to die. And I just said, meeting over, no, thank you. I'm out of here now. So I said, Joe, you know, and he was like, oh, okay. So the two of us just went, I said, I don't want to.
Who was she? Do you remember what?
Yeah, I know now. I didn't know at the time, but she was the coordinator for the
organ transplant. Oh, so she had her eye on the organs. So
she wanted the organs. I mean, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, because obviously that's their job, is to identify where there's, you know, opportunity, because that can save other people, many people's lives. So she did it in the wrong way.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sure most of them don't do it in the wrong way, because they have to be very sensitive, because otherwise, you know,
doing the wrong job.
Terrible, yeah. She didn't do her job properly on that day, and I'm, you know,
and you remember that, don't you? Quite vividly.
Never forget that. I can even picture her. And so she launched in there too quickly. So anyway, yeah, we just left that room, and they must have just thought, don't know quite what to do now. But they were kind of saying, you know, I think they were doing tests on the brainstem just to see. And then eventually they explained to me what was happening, because he was on a life support machine. And they explained to me that it wasn't, because we were saying, yeah, but people come out of comas though. You know, this happens all the time. And they were saying, yeah, but he's not in a coma. It's low. It's deeper than that. It's like the brain is not operating. And because I remember, I know it sounds crazy, but Jamie and I were we just had this weird conversation where we were like, oh my God, wouldn't it be great if he was in a coma? You know, it was like, that would be a step up if he was in a coma. And so they explained that, and they would do more tests. You know, they would test him every so often to see, and they would take him off to see if his body would automatically try.
He didn't look good, did he? He didn't look
no,
good,
but at first, I mean, he had, you know, bruises and things like that. But at first, I didn't think I thought he just looked unconscious at first. I did think that, you know, and I just thought no. And we were looking at him all the time. We kept thinking that we saw movements, and, you know, I recognised that was probably involuntary stuff now, but at the time it didn't seem like that. And it may not have been. There might have been the odd movement that wasn't. I still don't know at what point the brain stem death happened, whether it was already there or whether it did happen down the line. I don't know. But there was no coming back from it. That was clear eventually. But I just didn't want to give up, because I just thought, well, these things happen sometimes, and, you know,
I remember, you know, because you asked me to talk to the consultant about trying to get a second opinion.
Yeah, I didn't want to just take their first opinion.
No, because they were trying to say, look, this is it, switch them off. Yeah. Our opinion's enough, and you wanted, no, I want to get a second opinion on this.
This is a big decision.
I remember going in with you with the consultant, and, you know, trying to persuade him to give us more time, and we want to do more research, and I think we definitely got a bit more time, because I remember going home and researching how to bring people out of coma with vitamin C and all that.
We wanted to,
and Jamie contacted Michael Schumacher's doctor, right? And he was an expert in it. And he did say that the two best places for head injuries was where Alan was or London. But he said if you can get him through until Monday, he said you can possibly get him a second opinion, but you would have had to move his body. You know, we had to put him in an ambulance, and it was all a bit too much, wasn't it? In the end,
But also, I think, so that was, I can't remember what day that was. Maybe Friday, because the accident happened on the Thursday. Yeah. So maybe that was all happening Friday and Saturday. Yeah. But then, and people were just around, and I only thought about it recently. I didn't really, it didn't dawn on me at the time. I just thought people, and they probably were they were there to just support him. Of course, yeah. But it almost was like we were all kind of waiting for the inevitable to happen, but we didn't know we were.
But you were fighting for his life, weren't you? And, you know, I hope I have someone fighting for my life like you fought for Alan's, and I really mean that. It was a valiant effort, and, you know, everyone was there to give you the support that you needed in order to give him his best chance, you know, and you did.
Thank you. And then I think, so, and Sonny was there as well, you know, he was there, and we didn't sort of, I don't know how, you know, how he saw it and how it affected him, but I think on that Sunday, I remember, you know, obviously all the, you know, loads of the artists were still there, people were coming and going and stuff, and Joe was in the other room. And I remember going into the ward and sitting next to Alan, and I could see a difference. I knew he was going. It was not the same. And you could see, it was like the life force was leaving. I could see it. Yeah. You know, his face looked different and it just wasn't the same.
Time to go.
Yeah. And I just thought, no, he's going. So so then I was all right about it. I mean, I wasn't all right, obviously devastated, but I accepted that what was happening and that, this machine's not going to keep him alive. You know, so that was when it happened. And as I say, that would have been the time when maybe that conversation with the woman, if she'd have been a bit more sensitive, could have happened.
But in some ways, she gave you the motivation to, you know, pull up a fight at least.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah, she did. She got me.
She got you going, didn't she?
Yeah, she got the adrenaline. Yeah, I suppose so. So that's when, you know, it happened. On this
I was devastated. I mean, I don't think I've been affected by someone's death as much as I was by Alan's. It was a real big loss, obviously, you know, incomparable to yours, but and Sonny's. But it was like, you know, he was a really dear friend and major influence on my life.
And such a big, powerful personality that it was like, it's just like, that doesn't make sense that personality can just...
I was so gutted.
Yeah.
But it was, you know, that was a real horrible, tragic way for him to go, and he was obviously taken way too soon.
And he'd have been so angry.
Yeah, you know.
Because he obviously thought, he always thought that he had a ticket, like a free ticket, because he'd been through stuff. He naively thought that meant that he was immune to more tragedy because
he's already been through it
with his brother and his mum, and then his dad died a few years later. And I mean, they were, you know, in Anglesey, they were like dying all the time. You know, it's like, who else?
It's a weird place in Anglesey, though, isn't it? Yeah, it's a weird place.
Yeah, and so it was like he thought that had given him this sort of invincibility thing. So he would have been like, no, you've made a mistake. You know.
But there is a mystery over the circumstances that led up to his death, isn't there? We don't really know what happened.
No.
And there's speculation. And I remember after he'd passed, you know, me, you, Joe, and Jamie went to investigate the crash site.
Yeah. Because it was just, it didn't make sense, like, because he was such a proficient cyclist, and it was it wasn't like some side road, it was a big dual carriageway that was, you know, main route into Liverpool from Prescott and the other way. And
because it didn't make sense, the actual accident itself.
How did that happen? There was no damage to the actual bike.
No.
Which was weird. You know, when we got it back, it was like the police said that it had been checked by forensics, and it didn't look like an impact had happened to it, which was peculiar. So we didn't know where it was.
And who found him?
Well, as it turns out, there was no CCTV on the road.
But there was. Like, we went looking, but it was off.
It was off. Yeah. It was off. And there were several of them that were all off. I think there was a couple of main points where they weren't working. So I think you and Joe and Jamie went knocking on doors to see if anybody had private CCTV, and there was one house that did.
Yeah.
But it was just prior to the accident. So like,
he did show us. So,
he did, didn't he?
Yeah. So we sat in his bedroom and he replayed it.
So you saw Alan go past.
I think he might have even said the police had been previous, maybe.
Oh, to check it.
So you see Alan riding past on the dual carriageway.
Yeah.
Right, and then about 20 seconds later, a police car.
A car, yeah. I think there was another car as well. There was a red car somewhere.
Yeah, but it wasn't. It was.
Was that after
the police car? It was after the police car.
Ah, was it?
Yeah. So it was Alan, then police
car, and then another car,
and then a red car, and then maybe a few hundred yards up from that
where it happened.
Was where it happened.
Yeah.
But there was no left turns going into it.
There was no left turns going into it. But what there was, on the opposite side of the dual carriageway was a
slip road,
a road that came onto the dual carriageway. So if you were wanting to come onto the dual carriageway and go right, that's where it would have.
Wasn't it the police that found him?
It was the police that found him. So he had come off his bike, and they basically, it must have been seconds later, is there on the floor, and they.
So what they said is that the accident had happened seconds before they...
Just before, literally.
Yeah.
literally just before they got to the scene. So he'd been there no more than seconds, according to them, before they found him. And as
unusual.
it happened, yeah, very. And as it happened, because you would think that to be some kind of commotion or something, you know, but nobody saw it. There was nothing. But then they spotted an ambulance coming down the other way, and they flagged down the ambulance, and the ambulance did a U-turn and came.
Two weird coincidences, that, isn't it? The police and the ambulance being on the site, yeah.
So now the police were supposed to be on a call out, but they weren't, like, it wasn't sirens and speed. It was, oh no, I don't think they were on a call out. That was the type of vehicle that they were in, but it was not, they said they weren't actually speeding to go somewhere, so I don't know what they were doing. But anyway, so that apparently they find him seconds after it's happened, flag down this ambulance. The ambulance gets him, you know, does some CPR on him, gets him in the ambulance and off to the hospital. So, you know...
So if you're piecing together what happened, what you'd have is based upon the evidence that we know, which is only limited, is that Alan is along a dual carriageway, and then there's police behind him, because we see that on the video.
Yeah.
Right? And then somewhere between that happening and that happening, Alan comes off his bike. Yeah. And either he's knocked off his bike. Yeah. Or he has a mechanical failure on the bike. Yeah. And therefore
or maybe something swerved and he's, you know, it's made him without touching the bike and he's come off it. Or the other possibility was that
the red car hit him, but the police had seen that.
Could be that. Or there was a grid that was uneven, that maybe the tyre had got stuck in that. And so we were clutching.
We'll never know. We
can't know. And Joe, you know, and I know...
So frustrating at the time, because I remember we were like private investigators trying to piece together what happened.
Joe was obsessed with like time and motion and all the rest of it. He had it all like plotted down, and well, if he got to there, and then that, you know, and it was just ridiculous. And then I was thinking, well, you know, if there's somebody in my mind, it was the red car. You know, for ages I was like, if the red car, they know they've done it and they're driving around, it's on their conscience. And then I thought, they might not. Even if it was the people in the red car, they might not know what they've left behind. Yeah. You know, and who knows what happened? We never found out.
We'll never know either.
We'll never know, unless Alan comes.
We meet him
once
kind of again. Message. You know, after our time on this mortal coil, let's hope he's up in the great gig in the sky.
I know. Let's hope so. He's discarded his spacesuit, which he always talked about, and
great guy. Loved him. Absolutely loved him. And then it was his funeral, and I've got to say that was the best funeral I've ever been to. It was the coolest funeral. Again, it was like going to a gig. Yeah. And you done him proud. It was a Volkswagen camper van brought him in.
White cream one, if I remember rightly. Yeah, and a wicker basket.
And a wicker basket for a coffin, which was you know, super cool.
And it was in the woodland, Green Acres woodland thing, which had beautiful like modern building. Do you remember with the glass thing? And they had
great service.
It was a brilliant playlist and all of that. It was fantastic.
It was all the music, wasn't it? Someone did an edit of all the videos of him, because there was an interview with him, wasn't that? Did that play?
I think somebody, a friend of ours, made a collage, like a sort of montage. Dom Foster made a montage of things of like videos of him in bands in Top and stuff like that.
It was cool.
And then
and it was. I remember the walk up to the burial, and it was literally in a forest, wasn't it? It was like a light.
It kind of reminded me of the Wicker Man.
A little bit. Yeah, but he was in a wicker basket.
Like
that's right.
Trailing up to the thing. Yeah. It reminded me of that a little bit. Oh. And then and so everybody kind of like, it's almost like a party around the, you know, the like the gravesite, which is a bit weird, you know, but everybody was it was all a bit,
Just before we go any further, I think we should do a toast at this point. Make a toast to Alan Wills. Yeah. Hope he's watching.
Yeah, his spacesuit or not.
Cool.
Yeah.
But that's not the end of the story.
No.
Yeah, so even though it felt like it was a supernova and a star collapsed in on itself, you carried on and you kept Deltasonic going and continued Alan's legacy. So he was developing Vryll Society.
Yeah.
Were they called Vryll Society at that point?
Not at that point. They were going to do the Vryll Society night, but they hadn't changed the name to that. And we were trying to work out what they should be called, because they knew that it wasn't going to be it was serotonin for that transitional period. And
tell me about the aftermath of Alan no longer being around, and like how you came to terms with the loss, but also the project, which was still, you know, his name, wasn't it?
Well, I think it was probably a little bit easier for me because I was kind of involved a little bit before it happened, because I think anyway, from what I can remember, I'd go down to rehearsal room with him sometimes. So I was aware of what was going on and I was a fan. I loved the music. I loved the Dirty Rivers, but I loved what it was turning into as well. So I was genuinely into it. And obviously I was very close to Joe, and Joe and I were, you know, clinging on to each other really because, you know, it was...
They were like brothers, weren't they? Joe and Alan.
Joe was absolutely bloody
They were
devastated.
just like that. They were so close.
They were. So he felt it really strong, you know, really heavily.
Did you consider just like ending Deltasonic at that point? What was it that made you decide to carry on with it? I just
didn't think about...
You just carried on.
I just carried on. I knew that I don't think it was a rational thought, I need something to do or anything like that. It was just kind of, it was just there and it had to be done, and they were lost unfinished. And we were all lost, and we were like needed some, we did need something to do, but we didn't think of it that way. It was just like, well, let's just get this done, you know, let's carry on. And I can't remember whether we had a meeting about it or whether we just like, well, what's going to happen now and shall we carry on? I think it probably did happen like that, where we made a conscious decision to keep going. But, you know, it was Alan's thing to develop them. But also Joe was involved. He would go down with Alan a lot, you know, down to the rehearsal room. So Joe knew the direction that they were taking. And he was, you know, he kind of then stood in for Alan in that respect. And I also got involved in that. I'd come down to the rehearsal room and I'd, you know, tell them which tracks I was into and not, and maybe, you know, things like that. So we just got involved, and I remember that first week, actually. I think it was the first week. They were playing, they had a gig somewhere in town. I can't remember where the place was. And we went to it, Joe and I, and I can't remember whether Jamie came. We went to this gig and it was the maddest storm. It was just like a ridiculous thunderstorm. And I remember we were all shocked and, you know, in this mad headspace. But we went to this gig and it was weird. I think it was only days after it had happened and it was all just like mental. And, you know, it just made it even more weird that there was this big, like really crazy thunderstorm going on. And we went and watched them. And I don't know what people must have, you know, you're not aware of how people are, you know, are looking at you or whatever. They must, oh God, what's going on in their heads? You know, I don't mean like judging me for being there. I mean, like, I just don't know, you know, but we just were there, and it was like, it was actually a brilliant gig from what I can remember. And then we just carried on. And then it was like, and I got more and more involved. And then, you know, the music was getting better and better. And then I was getting more excited about it. And it was helping me to get through this period because it was keeping me busy. Sonny and I had obviously come back from France, and we were living over on the Vryll in a little cottage. And so, yeah, we just cracked on, and we kept going down to the rehearsal room, and then, you know, just like...
I think it's great, though. I think it's great that his legacy was continued, and there was unfinished business, wasn't there?
It was his thing. It wasn't like it was a brand new thing that he did.
And it was like almost, it was part of his comeback. Yeah. Right? It was the energy that he needed to revive guitar music and Deltasonic, and it was all part of the project. And I think it's a really... it's a really good part of the story that it didn't end. It didn't end at that point. No. You know, it continued, and Deltasonic had more to do and more to say.
Yeah, and it was from him starting that process with them, and you know, and they all bloody loved him. You know, as all of the artists did. They absolutely, you know, Mikey probably, you know, he's a very sensitive boy, but they all absolutely adored Alan and respected him, and again trusted him. And listened to his advice.
Well, you knew he wouldn't stab you in the back. That's what it was. And you could trust him with your secrets.
Yes.
You know, he's a confidant as well as a friend. You can tell him stuff, you know.
Yeah. So I think they were... we were just all in this shock thing, and we were just all wanting to just keep going, and nobody quite knew where it was going to go. Actually, I think I hadn't moved back from France properly because I was thinking... I remember being in France and them sending me stuff, you know, they'd go into rehearsals or whatever, and then they'd send me tracks, and I'd be like, right, okay. And then I got all the contacts that I knew from Alan, you know, and from Sony and stuff like that, and
And this is not 2015, isn't it? Or
yeah,
late
2014 when the accident happened. So this kind of was throughout the rest of it. It was May, so of 2014. So this was still, you know, in 2014 when all this was happening, because it was like we just continued straight. There was no break, and so then it became about, well, we haven't got any money to do this. Like we want to do an album and all the rest of it, and touring. I don't even know how we got. I think we borrowed money from the parents. I think put money into them touring. You know, we all kind of chipped in together.
Yeah.
You know, it was really on a shoestring, you know, but we got them gigs and all the rest of it. And so we just kept going on and like just keeping going and just like keep swimming, and you know, and it was just kind of like the money will come somehow. And then we got them a gig with I think it was Blossoms. I think we got them a gig with, and I knew the agent that I was going to invite I knew him anyway from previous bands that that he'd worked with. So it was Charlie Myatt, and so we knew him. But I also knew Charlie was very honest. He wouldn't take on anything that he wouldn't just do it for like
favour.
Yeah, or feeling sorry for me. Do you know what I mean? It would be like, no, if it's not good, we can't do it. And he would have a team of people who would give the thumbs up or not. They liked what they heard, so it was enough for him. I think he was coming up for Blossoms anyway, but he, because I think he was either their agent at the time or was going to be. So there was at this gig anyway where they supported the Blossoms, and there was another band we had on which was what Dustland ended up being. Can't remember what they ended up being called, but they were on as well. He didn't go for them, but on like after the gig he said, yeah, I want them, I want to sign them. So we got Charlie Myers as their agent. I was like, oh my God, can't believe this is happening. So that was the first time when I thought this might happen now. Yeah. Because, upstairs...
You're at the end of a cycle of guitar music as well by that point, where it was becoming more difficult, I guess, to make it as a band. Because
maybe so. I think Tame Impala were happening and all of that. There was a bit of that going on. And but probably still it was...
Definitely becoming more difficult,
So it was. So when Charlie said yes, I was like, oh my God, thank God.
Is that an exciting moment for you?
Yeah, it really was. I felt really good about that. And I trusted Charlie as well, and I got on with him. He was a really nice guy, and I knew he would do right by them. So they got them some good tours, and so they toured with Blossoms for a bit. Then we got them out there. I think we released a couple of singles.
You record the album at this point?
No, because we didn't have the money to record the album.
So
it was just like, let's just keep going, go with the flow.
Still trying to build the buzz, trying to find the money to get the album recorded. You had the songs though, yeah?
Yeah, but they were still writing them. They were still, but they had most of them. We were trying to work out what would be
on the record,
but they were developing all the time as well. So it was changing, like the tone of the whole thing was changing a bit, but it was kind of coming together where they wanted it to be.
Was it posing a difficult challenge to find the money in order to make the record?
But I didn't think about that. Yeah. It was just like, that'll happen. Yeah, it was like, it was... Because
you're an independent at this point, weren't you? Deltasonic didn't have any backing from any major label. This was purely just an independent label.
Yeah. And the funny thing was, I had to go and have meetings, and I hadn't done that before. Because that was all Alan's thing. And I was like, I don't know what they thought, whether they were this grieving widow coming down, like to have a meeting with us, and I don't think they did think that.
You fronted it though, didn't you?
I did, but I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I just went down.
Was you dealing with any people that you dealt with in the past?
I hadn't really dealt with them directly. It was always Alan. I kind of maybe knew some of them via Alan. Maybe I'd met some of them at certain things, but I didn't know them. I knew Mike Smith. He was in publishing I knew him through Alan, but. No, there was a few. I can't even remember who they are now. But
so big challenge.
Yeah, I was going down to London. It was like the big bloody,
that feeling,
small town girl going down to the big smoke.
The
Alan
big
was
buildings.
used to it, but it was a bit nerve wracking. But then I did know some people, because there was like Nick Burgess, who was the guy that Alan managed in Gluebound, and he'd then gone on to be, I think he was head of Virgin at the time, maybe MD at Virgin. So I knew some people who had developed over the course of the time. And what I did know about Nick, even though when I first knew Alan, Nick was quite sort of I'd say reserved. You know, he'd phone up Alan, and it was always like, "Hi, is Alan there?" And we didn't really know each other. We didn't connect as such, but. Boy, when Alan died, he was there. He was there. He was like on the phone, and he was devastated. He really was. Alan, I think even Alan would have been surprised. You know, Alan knew, you know, that he got on really well with Nick, but I think he'd have been surprised with how it affected a lot of people. But even, you know, Nick was just so devastated, and he was on the phone to me. He kept, you know, he rang me to see if I was all right. He was so good, and so he would always take my call. You know, I didn't talk to him about any of that at the beginning, but like when I needed to go and see people, I did call Nick, and he was like, "Yep, absolutely." I wasn't used to kind of doing that thing of going down and sort of, and I didn't really know what I was asking for either. You know, I just
waiting for them to offer
money. You know,
Yeah.
I kind of wanted them to kind
But
of.
you did get it. Well, you got some money, didn't you?
Well,
there was a
it
deal that
ended
you did.
up where we got it through doing a publishing deal with. So Charlie,
The
Myers,
manager,
who's
the agent. Yeah.
He wasn't into publishing at the time.
Yeah.
I don't know whether he set up the publishing because he really wanted a vehicle to, you know, to help. He knew that we needed money. So I'm sure he was planning to do it anyway, you know. But anyway, he set up a publishing company and did a publishing deal for us with the Vryll Society, and then that
paid for the
album to be made.
So tell us a little bit about the making of the album and what you remember about that. Was it an exciting time? Was it a stressful time?
It was all of it.
Yeah,
all of it. Yeah, because we were doing personalities. Like,
but also it was the first record under Deltasonic that didn't have Alan at the helm. Didn't it?
Yeah. To do that, you know, just between us, it was that.
Yeah.
It was a new experience completely.
And how long did it take to record?
I reckon, about a year. Because I think it was around 2017 when we did publishing. But it's a beautiful record, and you know, I absolutely love it.
It's awesome. It's like I'm so happy that we've come back together, because I haven't seen you in years, right? Yeah. And I went off in a different direction, obviously, and we all did. And I hadn't even heard the record.
No.
Right? And you know, it was a real surprise to listen to it. I was like, wow, this is so good.
So advanced
so
from where
good.
it started.
And it was the sophistication of the music.
Yeah.
But also Mikey's vocal on it is
just like beautiful.
Yeah, like angelic, like you said.
Angelic.
And so it's quite a journey from this like very guttural, hard rock and roll sound that he had originally to
this beautiful ethereal sort of sound.
There's some really good tracks on there.
You know, it did help that, you know, we had Steve Lamack was a big fan. You know, we had Dave Monks. I have to give Dave Monks a shout, you know, because he has been for years. Dave Monks has been champion of artists from Liverpool. You know, he's brilliant. I think he's undervalued or whatever. You know, he's
like a local John Peel, isn't he? I suppose.
Yeah, he's brilliant. Dave Monks. He's such a nice guy, and he will. You know, he supports wherever he can, and he really did. I think he recommended them for Six Music plays or whatever, and Steve Lamack picked up on them. He loved them, and then he recommended them for South by Southwest in Texas. And then at that point, it was getting to the point, you know, so we had the agent, we had the publishing deal was being talked about, and then, you know, we just got this South by Southwest thing, and then I found out that Rob Swerdlow liked the Vryll Society, and I felt like I'd got to this point where, you know, I say, got the agent, everything's in place. We've got the, you know, we know what the record's going to be. It's all looking good. We've got Steve Lamack on board. We've got South by Southwest. Everything is there. I feel like I might need somebody else who's got the big boots. And, you know, and we did really, like, we bonded, me and Rob, you know, once we got to know each other. It was like, we had a great laugh, you know. I really, you know, I think a lot of Rob, and we got on really well, and we, you know, he knew.
He's a cool guy.
Yeah, and, you know, he stayed in the background to the point where, you know, he knew that the record was, he didn't stay totally in the background. Obviously, we had meetings with the band, and, you know, he gave them advice and things like that, but, you know, he didn't kind of interfere in terms of too much stuff that had already been done, and he was kind of ready to just kind of move in when need be, and you know, and he was obviously supportive when the, you know, the album was being made and stuff like that, in terms of, you know, giving his sort of advice as a, you know, sort of experienced manager, you know, if it was needed. So, you know, it was good having him on board, and it was good for me to have that sounding board. Joe was in the studio a lot with the band, but I didn't have Alan. If I had had Alan, I wouldn't be doing it.
Of course.
But
yeah,
I didn't. I needed that person to kind of just say, "Don't worry," you know, whatever.
Great the fact that you've released the album. Awesome. It was a completion. It was a completion of, you know, the legacy that Alan had created with Deltasonic. But Deltasonic has got a final chapter, if you like, and it was this gig for the Vryll Society.
Oh, for the album.
Yeah, because it's unusual that you can close the book on a story, but I think we can with Deltasonic largely. And
it was brilliant. You know, we'd released the album. We did have a...
You sold out the O2, was it?
For it, but then we went and had an actual gig for it, and it was, we sold out. You know, it was packed, and it was just wonderful. And all the parents were there, and we'd all been on this journey together. You know, they were all devastated about Alan as well, and they didn't know whether the kids were going to, you know, break up the band or whatever. And we were all in it together, and you know, we were just all there, and it was just, we all looked at each other, and it was like, oh God.
Well, go and listen to it. Anyone that's listening, go and find them on Spotify. It's a really great record. I loved it. Yeah. So, what an amazing story.
I know.
Yeah, we only just touched on it, really, didn't we? There's so much more we can talk about, and there's so many other bands that we can go into.
Yeah, sorry for any bands that we didn't mention, but it's just not time.
Unfortunately, I'm on a clock. What do you think Alan would make of the current state of music, guitar music, or the rebellious spirit that we come to think is in guitar music? Because I know recently there's been a few question marks over, you know, what are bands actually about these days?
Yeah.
I mean, what is the identity of music?
I think he would be absolutely head wrecked by all of it.
Yeah,
I think he would, because there's no clear other to rebel against for kids. I don't think. You know, I was talking to somebody about this, and we were just saying it's like, now, you know, whereas in, you know, the olden days, like the old school rebels, it would be, you know, rebelling against the parents in general, you know, stuff, and, you know, being a bit raucous about it maybe, and, you know,
well, it was always meant to be you know,
anti-establishment,
against authority. It was you know, music and being in a band represented the ultimate freedom. Is that you weren't working for the man. Right, you were making music. That's I was expressing myself in the world. Yeah, I wasn't no slave. I wasn't no, you know, person who was just being controlled by these authority figures, and they had the freedom through their role and their status to be able to give two fingers to the man. Yeah. On behalf of everybody else, because most people couldn't, because they had to go and do the drudgery of the day-to-day job. So that's why, you know, they
had the freedom to do that,
and the hero worship was given to them because they were doing it on behalf of us, right? And I feel as if there's a disconnect, and maybe that's why we're at the end of a guitar music cycle, because there's no heroes, there's no rebels, is there really? I mean, there's one or two out there. Yeah,
I just don't know what it is. I don't know what it is. I don't know whether the themes have changed. I don't know whether because it's the politics that have changed. I think I was speaking to this person, and he was saying about how, you know, when he was a kid, it would be, you know, smoking was still being advertised, and there was all the, you know, all the stuff that the previous generation parents were kind of okay with, you know, that's clearly seen as really bad now.
Sex, drugs and rock and roll isn't really cool anymore, is it?
No, it's the opposite now. You know, it's like, no, you've got to be healthy. We've got to save the planet. We've got all of these really good, wholesome things. It's like Safi and Fab, isn't it? Yeah. You know, it's all subverted reversed, now. It's all reversed, and it's like, but what is everybody rebelling against?
But do you think that maybe that's why guitar music is going through a bit of a struggle at the moment? Is that does guitar music naturally lend itself to that idea of sex, drugs, and rock and roll? And because that's not really cool anymore.
Oh, maybe that's why they say they're dinosaurs, because that's not relevant.
That's not relevant. And the guitar music, until someone comes along to reinvent what it means to play guitar and guitar music,
use something else to express that rebelliousness, which I'm sure is happening. You know,
the different genres have kind of taken over, haven't they? Because what were you telling me before about grime and hip hop? Oh
well, I mean, it's not I don't know anything about it, but
me
it's
neither.
Just, you know, so let's not go there too far. But no, you know, somebody who does was just basically saying that, you know, that it is hip. The whole thing is a hip hop now, isn't it? But different strands of it, and he was saying that grime is particularly regional genre, which is regional within regional, because it's London, but it's a region within London as well. So it's not the same in America.
Music is an expression of the culture that we live in, isn't it? Yeah. You know, and it's trying to find what the next expression of our culture is, of what it is that, you know, we're about. I think that's It's going to be interesting.
It's just mad. It's just like, to me, you're looking, I don't know, if I was a kid now, I don't know, I wouldn't know who was rebelling against. Left has turned to right, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Left has gone right, right's gone left. And I don't know who are the baddies anymore.
Well, it's for me, it's like, massive corporations, as we see the centralization of more and more corporations, so fewer and fewer people own smaller number of corporations, including the music, is that it's very difficult to be a free voice working within that framework, because
if you want to be able to carry on,
ultimately they're like, if you say anything that's out of line, you're not getting a deal, you're not getting access to the resources.
But my opinion is, if you're a true artist, you don't give a shit about that.
Is it easier now for an independent artist to make a living or a career?
I think it is, yeah.
Because who we've got a lot of respect for? Ian McNabb.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Because Ian McNabb makes a record once a year himself off his own back, tours it, right? And
makes a living.
Makes a living,
Good
right? So he can carry on doing what he loves doing and being a free, proper, true rock star.
Yeah.
I love him. I've got massive respect for him. But so I wondered if, streaming as the new way of...
It's actually opened up that
does
freedom.
It? I don't know.
No, it does, yeah. Because we've got a connection with Spotify for a start, because we've got Brian from the Dead 60s, who was the drummer.
The drummer, yeah.
Is now,
well, great guy.
He got his...
Super cool guy.
Similar thing to Alan in terms of decided, right, I've done the band thing, I'm going to get into the industry. He was one of the people in the band who would take notice at meetings.
Yeah.
He knew the people to connect
Had his
with.
eye on the prize, didn't he?
Yeah, he knew he was on it. So when he moved down to London, he knew who to take who to try and get meetings with. And then I can't remember. He went to PRS. He had a job at PRS for a while, and then at Spotify started, I think 2008. I think it was some time like that. And he got a job there. So he's been there from quite early. I think it was maybe going about 5 years before Brian started.
So knows the game inside out.
He's been there for about 10 years, 9 years. So he's grown with Spotify and he's got a really good job. So he knows how it works.
Because Matt, who was in Dead 60s with Matt McManaman, Matt, you've got too many M's. You've got too many M's in your name. Right, he's doing something similar in terms of what we're saying about McNabb. He's as a single solo artist, self-releasing.
Can be done.
And he's doing well.
Yeah. And if you know how to operate, and Spotify do, and there's other streaming sites obviously, but that's the one that everybody knows, isn't it? And that's it's the main one, and that they do workshops. They engage with artists to help them, because it obviously pays off for them because they're getting more content, but they work with artists to show them how to capitalize on it and how to get playlists and how to get on other people's playlists and, increase your stream levels.
The old model of record labels really was a marketing operation. It was a how to get the record to market, to sell units.
It was a mixture of that and being a bank.
Yeah.
Funding and then marketing and promoting and all of that stuff.
Yeah. So what do you think the future of music is?
Not a clue. I don't even know the future of anything anymore.
I
wouldn't even know where to start with the music. I don't even know. I don't know is the answer.
Are you hopeful that there will be a revival of the type of music that we grew up with, that we like and we love? The things that turn me on musically, that seems to be...
I don't know.
It's just a memory, or whether I'm just turning into a dad
rock.
Go.
I think we've got to a point in the world with everything, the whole sort of transition, the whole sort of technology thing and everything. It's just changed, and you can't want that back. You have to just allow things to go. It might be fun if it did happen, but I'm not hopeful, and I'm not really... I don't think I'm bothered whether that happens.
Right. Yeah,
I don't mean I don't. No, I get I'm not arsed. It's not something that I think. I wish.
Yeah.
That was.
Well, for me, I was so disappointed with some people who I really loved and respect the music of over the last few years, and it was like something good has got to come from that. Yeah. Because it was so disappointing, right? And I think hopefully that will be a catalyst for. A new adventure with kids who want to change the world.
What I would like to see
music.
is that I'd like to see artists. I'd like to see the energy, and I'd like to see a bit of rebelliousness.
Yeah,
that's what I want to see.
Of course,
I don't want to see people just being corporate. Homogenized frightened corporate.
Owned, basically.
Yeah.
Owned.
Don't want to see that.
It was meant to be the opposite of that, wasn't it? Yeah.
There's always that there as well. You know, you've always had your Mr. Blobbies in the top 10.
Yeah.
You know, but no, that's, if I'm hopeful for anything, it's that the rebelliousness is there and will show itself and change things.
So as the custodian of the Deltasonic back catalogue, what's your kind of like hopes and dreams with the catalogue moving forward? Do you have any, you know, ideas of releases or anything like that?
Well, there'll be re-releases, and there'll be things that, you know, obviously like anniversary issues and things like that. I mean, the Deltasonic, the Coral's debut album, 20 years today, so there'll be a Zutons one. You know, so we'll be looking at promoting
next year, I guess, isn't it?
That.
Zutons one. Yeah.
I mean, it's not on Deltasonic as such because it's sort of licensed to Sony, but there'll be things around it. And we may do some, you know, some stuff like that. And then there's always, you know, there's hidden gems that haven't even been released that I'm you know, that I'm looking at doing, and then we might even do a book. There's things to do. Great. You know, to tell the story, and you know, so we were thinking of doing some kind of book with, you know, artwork and various, you know, sort of things like that.
And James Slater's just done a film, hasn't he, with the Coral?
James Slater, yeah, he's just done a like a documentary of. Well, is it a documentary or a film? It's lots of animation, I think.
About
it's about the Coral
album,
rather than Deltasonic, so it's kind of to celebrate that. And I think that will be probably coming out either late this year, 2023, I mean. And then they might do a little tour around that. So things like that is what Deltasonic are going to do. Unless something just ridiculous turned up, and it was like, and no one else was onto it, and I was like, you've got to do it. You've got to do this, and then I'll give somebody a ring and see what they want to do.
So where can fans find you, find Deltasonic, the music, if they want to go on?
So they can go on our website. There'll be a Deltasonic store. So Instagram, we have Deltasonic on Instagram and Facebook. So social media, website, and the store will be on the website, so people can buy from there.
And what about you? Are you on Instagram or Facebook? Where can people find you?
They can find me on Instagram and Facebook, just Anne Heston.
Okay, I'll put the links in the description below.
Yeah.
And there was just one more thing.
Oh yeah.
There was a rumour going around Liverpool that Alan's real father may have been one of the most successful musicians in Liverpool's history. Can you shed any light on that rumour?
Well, there was a rumour. It came. He didn't even know about the rumour because his auntie.
It was after his death.
His auntie said, "I'm sure his dad can't name the person, obviously, because we don't know." So all I'll say is maybe we should let it be.
And I'm so grateful that you gave me this opportunity to chat to you about it. I've loved it, every minute of it.
I've enjoyed it too long.
Oh yeah, it's been great, and I look forward to the next one.
Yeah.
Anne Heston, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Deltasonic started, it was called EVA first, and that was for 18 months or something, and it was started, pretty much on New Year's Eve, the millennium, and then we were doing hip hop, and we put out 3 10-inches, and because we didn't have any money or distribution or anything, and that got us a distribution deal with Pinnacle. And then I just thought, right, I've had enough of this, I want to do guitars, and I sort of had an instinct that there hadn't been any great guitar bands for a while, and that you can tell if you're older, you can tell when the climate's going to change, so I sort of knew it was going to change. And then I went to see Peasy, a friend of mine who was running a rehearsal studio, and there was this bunch of kids there, and they were playing pool, and they just had that absolute cocksure confidence. In order to release the record, I needed to get them a manager first and start the whole thing, but no one was interested, so in the end I did it myself. Basically everyone loved the band, but the band was sort of signed to Deltasonic, or so everybody thought. They thought they were, but the truth is they were never signed to Deltasonic. And I was managing them at the time, so we couldn't actually have them signed to us. So it turned into, rather than signing the Coral, trying to do a label deal with us. And really that started out at a small level, and it took a while to do. And the great thing is, if you're heading in the right direction, it takes a while. Every week your hand gets stronger. Well, at the same time we had the Zutons. James from the Coral was saying to me, this guy's great, and I was saying, I've seen his band, they're crap, I don't like them at all. And anyway, so he said, no, you've got to hear his solo stuff. So we played him the stuff, and Dave was like 19 or something at the time, and I went, that's great, we love it. And then over the next probably 2 months he put together a band, and we were lucky at that time that Liverpool hadn't kicked off. So there was a lot of good musicians around, and he managed to get all the good ones in his band. He got Russ and Sean, Boise, and then they were playing as a 4-piece for a while. But I don't think it was till Abby joined that they became the Zutons properly.
How do you feel Deltasonic has affected the kind of music scene in Liverpool? As I said before, I think you're here in spite of the music scene.
It gives everyone, it brings everyone together in that there's a focus on someone for them to hate.